Well, hello, everybody. Re-examination show on the air, live on a Sunday night from the surface of the sun, as you could probably see behind me. The light does not diminish even if the blinds are there. So, today I want to continue the moral argument marathon. I'm going to up and share this screen, and I wanted to do it um, based on the after panel Missing Mod had concerning uh, my debates with Andrew Wilson. And I think this is the one. One of them we covered had to do with the Case for Christian Nationalism book written by Stephen Wolfe. And then the other had to do with, what would you call it? Yeah, what was that even called? Oh, yeah. The other two had to do with force doctrine. And the other one was whether or not you could have I was trying to drive at what the heck you could do to curb degeneracy if you weren't going to actually define what adultery was according to the Bible. Let's see, anybody in chat? I see some people in chat. Oh my goodness. This is old chat. Is this wow? It's showing chat from my previous chat from last week. That's insane. That's insane. All right, we'll begin. Anyway.
Re-examination, I would ask, isn't it closer to say that men granted women rights as opposed, well, you're not going to agree with this, but to say that women or men granted women rights as opposed to...
Birds aren't even real. Good to see ya. This is new chat. Yes, but in Riverside, they decide to screw it all up. So in my side, you can see the chat, but you see some chats from the previous week. It's weird, but I see yours as well. So Big Bad Mom is getting into whether or not rights are grounded in men, because in atheism, rights don't exist, just force. And so it would accommodate an atheistic framework pretty well, which is why Andrew uses it to say that you can't complain about what we're doing as like wronging somebody because rights don't actually exist. We're just made of matter, correct?
God.
So let's back
Yeah,
that.
I asked too many questions.
Anyway.
Re-examination, I would ask, isn't it closer to say that men granted women rights as opposed, well, you're not going to agree with this, but to say that women or men granted women rights as opposed to God granted humans rights, or men.
God grants humans rights. Yeah.
Yeah. So basically, because we're made in the image of God, we have rights, and that's been understood since time of Cain and Abel, when God says to Cain, your brother's blood cries out to me. And the same thing with Genesis 9:6, where it talks about he who sheds man's blood, by man shall his blood be shed as a penalty. So basically, rights are grounded in, I mean, more or less, even though I don't know if Richard Dawkins would put it quite that way.
As an atheist, I would say the statement that Andrew made about men granting rights is closer to the truth than that.
I get that, which makes it bizarre in my understanding. My world.
Like when we're talking about the right to vote for women, it was a group of women who each individually, subjectively came to the conclusion that they should have the right to vote, right? And then because they became such a big group, then the society tipped at a certain point and the law granted them the right to vote. But it started all within the mind of women. It started in the mind.
I don't think that's historically correct, no.
Okay.
I don't either.
Tell me then.
Well, I think historically in this country...
well, I'm saying the United States.
I know.
Yes,
I know,
in the US.
I know,
it started with women.
I know. But historically in this country, there were more women against suffragists
and suffragettes.
Yeah, but it took decades.
The votes. They needed the votes, right? Is that why they did it?
Everything is a fight in America, whereas in the UK, everybody is just polite and they sit down and sip tea and like, well, I think we should do this.
Because
Suffrage.
The numbers...
No, that was not an actual British accent. I'm not going to try. It's Sunday evening. maybe later.
Growing and growing.
Sorry,
until...
let me
go
finish. So there were more women against suffrage when they were granted than for suffrage. And in fact, as I'm saying, my argument was that, look, men were only granted suffrage by dint of being citizens, like maybe 40 years before that.
Yeah, the 14th Amendment, probably, right?
Right.
In this country, I'm talking about. I don't know
okay.
American facts of it, but it was late 1800s when men were finally granted full suffrage, and after that, then of course the first.
By the way, Birds, if you're still watching, what is your position on voting? What should the threshold be for when somebody could vote? I don't have an opinion on that because I don't think there's a moral obligation for governments to form some kind of voting facility. But if it's there, there's an argument to be made that everybody should have it. There's an argument to be made that only landowners should have it. There's an argument to be made that, there should be, some gradation somewhere. But I don't think there's a moral law that necessitates one position over the other.
World War happened, and after that, then women were granted suffrage. So I think it's a matter of it was pragmatic, right? That not just women were saying, we want the vote, although in a lesser number, but because there were less men around, that number or the representation of that number was larger. And I think the men that were left wanted.
I think ahead is going to be
participation
the
in the society.
Aiming the forcing of that idea out in the open is what worked.
Yeah, absolutely. It's the direct action that the suffragettes did that years, like we had rights from Runnymede onwards.
It's like
had rights from Runnymede.
Huh?
What do you ask?
BS asks whose idea was 9/11.
Oh yeah, we were doing this the whole thing over rights and men's ideas and whether or not rights were men's ideas, and I don't know.
So they'd be killing each other, you're saying, if it wasn't for
Uh-oh. It's missing Mod. And Mod, just so you know, this is actually live. I am a real person. This is not footage talking to you. This is not a ghost house, Raise them up, missing Mod. Last time you thought when I was doing the Ireland panel that you thought was a pre-recorded thing. It was not a pre-recorded thing. I raised them up for you live. Oh, where'd you go, Mod? I hope you're still there.
I am saying that there are a lot of fear-based enforcements in the culture
Definitely.
in China. And one of them
No, actually,
I literally know people that kill people.
Oh boy.
I think, but I think that's backwards. But I think that's backwards when it comes to China.
Oh, good, she says. Yes. Yeah, I'm here and I'm alive.
I think China kills a lot of people, and they'd be a lot less scared. They'd be a lot less scared to be more friendly and more open.
All right. Birds says, I'd push voting pretty far out. One head of household vote. I can't vote if you don't have kids. Can vote if you aren't third generation. Can't vote if you aren't 25. Interesting. I can see the logic behind that. Yeah, it'd be situation specific, but especially these days, I know why you would do that. And can't vote if you've been on state assistance in the last 6 months, right? Because I understand that Stefan Molyneux has who has changed a lot in the past 5-6 years, I think, or at least has made his differences a lot more known. He's talked about how with the voting system, it's the majority poor that will vote the money out of the pocket of the minority rich. And that's how socialism usually works out, is sometimes it works through nice, peaceful, democratic means, but it's done for vengeful, angry ends.
Or to dissent against their government, were they not under threat by their government? So I don't think that's the same scenario.
Yeah, so I think the culture is more authoritarian than we're used to in the West, and so it's very hard to relate anyway, traditionally speaking. And then also our closest living relatives through common descent is but
those don't seem crazy to me, says Birds, but definitely not the norm. Yeah, well, the norm is what? Monarchies and dictatorships throughout most of history, dynasties and oligarchs. So, I mean, we are out of the norm by having a voting system at all, or having a system that hems in the government rather than hemming in the people. So, yeah. And if I hadn't said before, Leo Babia, good show earlier with Tater. Let me know if you guys want me to drop the link and have more of a panel setting today, because I'm just kind of chill. However, I do want to review the 3-on-1 atheist morality thing that is going to happen in this.
Because we all eat and shit and, do the same things animals do. I mean, what? Yeah. That doesn't mean we're fucking animals. I mean, If you think
Really?
about it, well, are we plants too? I mean, are we
No.
insects too? No. I mean,
Well,
everything eats and breathes and drinks water on Earth, or at least everything uses water, right?
Yeah, but not everything fucks and gives birth.
Yeah, not single-celled organisms.
Whoa.
What?
Jeez.
What's what?
That was
Well,
bold.
I'm not jumping
Not
up.
you.
Oh, okay, I was like, I'm not
Oh, right,
disagreeing with
okay.
you, Mod. I'm just giving my
No, I'm
contribution.
just-
I'm not. Again, I didn't come here to like debate atheists, but apparently that just
It
debates
just
keep
happened.
happening.
Well, that's because I
It just
showed up.
happened.
You know what happens when you tell atheists you're not here to debate atheists? One moment you're hanging out, just having fun, talking about Andrew Wilson, talking about common stuff, talk about politics a little bit, talk about history a little bit, and then
Hold on. Can I
just
can I
happens.
can I oversimplify everything?
Oh,
I think
just
we're
did.
animals because animals is a man-made classification describing beings in a universe. It's not some statement about how close you are to a monkey. It's simply a classification, right? We
Yeah.
are in the gray ape family because we fit the definition of an ape, right? Even if you don't believe in evolution, even if you
I think I'm a just okay ape. I wouldn't go as far as to say I'm great.
believe we were all created, we still
It's
fit the
just-
definition of this man-made classification. Can we
It's
at least
rude.
agree on that?
Well,
It's rude and disrespectful to animals to say that we're fucking animals. I'm sorry. That's just how I feel about it.
Yeah, the place I would depart is I don't think that animals are moral agents. I think that we are. I think that we have a higher moral worth. Not that animals don't have a inherent worth to their life. I think they do. But I think that we are ontologically different on a spiritual level and on an accountability level, being actually made in the image of God. And animals aren't moral agents. So, like,
Okay, I've had this conversation with somebody, so hold on.
Okay, so I brought up the fact that animals are not moral agents. They're not culpable, right? So I wanted to hear a list because Pixie brings up a list of different attributes that people used to not attribute to animals, or different features or behaviors or instincts that people didn't think animals had at one point. And it is legitimate to bring up a certain pattern if the pattern proves some kind of continuum that would logically lead you to believe that anything on that continuum is up for question. So, here we go.
Bear with me here, okay?
Sure.
I'm gonna mute.
I think you're horribly wrong, first of all. But
I'm horribly wrong.
I think we've gone through this with science before, right? First, animals didn't have emotions. Oops, they do. Then animals don't.
Okay, so we got emotions, which I think can be observable not only with your face and your demeanor, and just your general health overall, but also chemicals, brain chemicals, what you can find, or at least what you can detect if you have like a cortisol spike or things like that, that can indicate stress, just as it does in humans. We can see the correlation there, so that's testable, observable.
Don't have family units. Oops, they do.
I was never aware that anybody said that animals didn't have family units, so that was news to me, because I think it was pretty clear that they did for a long time.
Then animals don't have languages. Oh, guess what they have? Animals.
Yeah, so animals have ways to communicate. Yep, I wouldn't deny that. I mean, again, that's directly observable, testable, repeatable.
Don't use tools.
Yeah. So things like chimpanzees will use tools. They will, if they see how you use a tool, or orangutans or any of the apes that are highly intelligent, they'll see how to use a tool, and they will be able to emulate that and use it and find utility of that in themselves. So that's true. But that's again a testable, repeatable claim. What's the next one?
That's what they use, right? The one distinction we have yet to falsify between us and animals, right, is that we have the collective ability to believe in fiction, and therefore we have the collective ability to build things that do not yet exist in our immediate reality. Our ingenuity seems to be incredibly unique, but outside of that, there's not a lot that separates us from a big portion of the animal kingdom, actually.
Robin Webster. Now, Robin was just watching another panel with Objective Ethics and Tavo-san Aubrey. So if you're not aware of Objective Ethics and Tavo-san Aubrey, definitely check out that panel they had earlier. Both very intelligent people. I don't think, is Pixie here? I don't think Pixie is here. But yeah. yeah, Pixie, you know, very smart, fun to talk to, very spirited individual. We'll say that. Can I say spirited for an atheist, or a, you know, a non-committed sort of materialist leaning? I would assume she's materialist leaning. That might be just an assumption on my part. However, yeah. Hey, Abe. Now, before I was talking about possibly opening up a panel a little bit, but I definitely want to cover what goes on in this debate because Abe says, "God bless you. Have a good stream, brother." Likewise, sir. Thank you so much. We're also going to finish up our Old Testament Rex and Rev series tonight. We're going to go over that last debate, and we're not going to get derailed. If people want to derail us for the conversation, we're probably going to bring out the band hammer for at least attempt a band hammer later this time because I want to at least get the right information out concerning that debate because it's an interesting debate. But Robin says that wasn't Pixie talking. Oh, it was Pixie talking. Pixie is not here though. As Kent Heaven would say, this is not Pixie. It's just a picture of her. And so that's her profile picture right there. But we're reviewing a impromptu debate where we were originally supposed to be going over my debates with Andrew, and then it devolved into "But God Not Real."
It certainly isn't self-recognition.
And a large neocortex. I mean, that's the difference between this. And
so my thing was we have moral culpability. We have moral significance to our actions and to our thoughts. And that's what separates us from animals. Pixie brought up a fact like a lot of atheists will say, we used to think thunder was Thor, and then that was disproven. Therefore, no God real. You know, again, not the most sophisticated atheist argument. I'm not saying that most atheists with a brain use that. When growing up, you kind of hear that or have seen that on the internet. And I'm not saying that that is the chief argument from atheists, but it follows a similar pattern to me when it comes to saying, like, we have all these testable, repeatable things that were falsified by testable, repeatable means because they were making claims about things that could be tested and repeated. But moral status is not something that can be tested and repeated in a lab. And so I don't think it actually fits the criteria that Pixie was bringing up.
Why we're able to use tools the way we do. It's simply brain size and an opposable thumb.
But babies can do that.
Well, hold on.
They're stupid.
Well, again, all those things just seem, even if people were making those claims, I also see all of those claims as like weak claims that don't prove anything one way or the other. So to stack that up against moral agency, I think is a different thing.
But if you have language and culture and you are capable of enforcing the rules of your community, what are you acting in?
Well, I think you're making a value claim there, right?
What the fuck?
So there's a difference between saying that we see these behaviors and then also adding on top of that, these behaviors are moral values. Because moral values involve responsibility, they involve culpability, they involve knowledge about morality, which is agency. There are so many things that animals don't have because they just have instincts and habitats and natures, but those natures are just functional within an ecosystem. We aren't made for, you know, any known ecosystem that I have. I mean, we wear clothes, we have to have shelters, we try to invent things like air conditioning. We can't handle many of these other diseases that, you know, animals, I mean, animals are fit within an ecosystem. We dominate ecosystems. We are outside the ecosystem.
You'd have to even to propose the question, you would have to either say that either morals are real and they're adhering by something that is transcendent, or you're saying that all morals are fake and therefore even humans aren't moral agents. And I don't think you're saying that. So that's a decision. But one of the many decisions people have to make. Pick a lane, one or the other. Either morals. I mean, she already said that we believe in lots of fictions, and the fictions, like say, I think what she's getting at is because we can think of things like Star Trek, we can start to think about ways that we can invent tricorders using the engineering of things that exist physically, and we can say, I want to get this effect, and before you know it, Steve Jobs makes a tablet, and everybody's doing it, and we live in Star Trek now, and even some parts of Star Trek seem behind where we are now. Which one would you take?
Well, then how are you defining moral? Because what is it that allows your choices to be moral and their choices to be amoral, even if motivated by the same or similar factors, i.e. family or protection or food source or whatever?
Yeah, because we we are made in the image of God. We have a different telos than animals. So, for example, even on your own scale, like if you've seen the debate between Sam Harris and William Lane Craig, one of the things William Lane Craig says in his opening statements is the shark forcibly copulates with the female shark, but he doesn't grape the female shark. The hamster might kill their offspring, but they don't murder their offspring. There's no actual moral. There's not an awareness that the animals have of any moral significance or oughts to that. Even if they operate within a system that we might impose some anthropomorphic pattern on top of, nobody reasonably thinks that, oh, we should put this hamster in hamster jail or this shark in shark jail or whale citizenship or anything like that.
Right, I'm going to grant you that, but also remember I said there's a large scale, and I also said a large portion of the animal kingdom, not the entire animal kingdom. So I can also cherry pick, right? And I can talk about orcas.
Well, I don't think it's cherry picking, because I think we're deriving different principles based on what humans are versus what animals are. So to say that some, I already accept that some animals use tools and some animals don't, and some animals have family systems and some animals don't. But I'd never accused her of cherry picking or being dishonest. I was willing to accept all that. So I don't, I think we can both be generous to each other and knowing what we mean.
Not just orcas, many dolphins and whales who, by the way, form alliances that are incredibly similar to gang wars. You guys should look it up. It's hilarious, kind of. But anyway, it's also brutal. They really do. Like, certain whales and certain dolphins are friends, and they'll team up against other types of whales. It's crazy. Anyway, they have their own languages. They have their own culture. They have their own rules. They enforce behavior. They mourn their dead incredibly hard.
Yeah, I've seen footage of monkeys doing that, and then crows, when one of the crows from their murder, as they call a group of crows, dies. They have what looks to be like some kind of crow funeral where they all stand around the body of the dead crow. So I've seen that.
They recognize themselves and others. They are conscious of looking at their own reflection and using it to self-groom, much like elephants, right? Again, the difference seems to be we are incredibly ingenuitive, and we have this ability to play with things that are not in our immediate reality.
Well, so she is focused on our above and beyond cognitive abilities compared to animals, but I am focused on the moral significance that is from humans. Not when I say from humans, I don't mean that originates with humans. It originates with God. But uniquely within this material realm, humans stand at the nexus of what is spiritual and what is physical. We have physical bodies, but we have a spiritual personhood. Our spirit carries on when we die, and that is us as a person. The body is part of us as well, but that can die, and yet the person remains. And that's also, you don't lose part of the person when you chop an arm off or anything like that. And then the person themselves, the individual, is not gone just because their brain is damaged. We still think of them as the same person. We wouldn't accuse them of being. We say they're a different person, but that's just a turn of phrase. It doesn't actually mean that we have reprogrammed them with a crowbar to their skull.
In a way that they don't. And if that is the separation you speak of, great. But if not, what else is it?
Well, again, morality would have to do with ontology rather than just mere capability anyway. So if you have a spiritual nature as well as a physical nature, and you're made in the image of God, that would explain why we have moral oughts that exist in the first place. Otherwise, you couldn't even talk about how Andrew's wrong, Andrew's disingenuous, Andrew's being deceptive, all this kind of stuff in a morally significant way, because otherwise then we're just making descriptor claims and we're not having an outrage about anything. But we can't say that about a shark or a bull or a lion
member of the
like
pod
that.
can be deceptive to other members of the pod, and this can get them just
Right, but there's no moral significance to an animal's deceptiveness. I mean, if that were the case, then mimicry itself in certain animals, they would be a living lie. There is, there is a species of butterfly whose wings look exactly like leaves, and that's mimicry, and that's deception. But they are not morally culpable as liars or deceivers. That's not real.
That's my point.
Get them kicked out.
That's my point. That's not a moral claim within the animal kingdom, which is, I think, there is a distinction there.
I would argue that is your belief, Rex, not a fact. Well, I mean, anybody can say that.
because we're not going to say that dolphin is morally culpable for what it should do and needs to apologize to the pod immediately. Because
I also think, Robin, in practice, that there are people you believe are evil out there, and that you believe that there are actions that are good, and that there are things that people should do to change the world to make it a better place, and there are things that people shouldn't do that they're currently doing that are making it a worse place. And I think that you are willing to use political systems in order to make those changes happen, whether it is your vote or if you go to Congress and, and you'd say, well, no, you're wrong. Okay. I wonder if anybody in this chat vote. I think everybody in this chat votes, I would guess.
If it doesn't, there is moral guilt that hangs over them as an individual pod member.
So you're saying that your distinction, there's no actual evidence behind your distinction other than our ingenuity and ability to play with fiction. It's just supported by your presupposition that we are created in the image of a deity.
It's actually supported also by this very conversation, because in order to hold my feet to the fire to an actual factual claim, that means I'm accountable for what I say, which means we're all accountable to get things right. We think that reality itself is prescriptive to what we think, and we think that we have a moral ought to accept the things we know which are true.
Right. So right there, in order for her words to have any weight as for my position, she's saying that because I don't have evidence for my position, I should shrink. That is a prescriptive claim. I should just shrink away from the conversation because you have nothing of value to bring to my attention. Whereas if you had evidence, evidence is necessarily of value because evidence is prescriptive to human thoughts. And evidence is a thing that we ought to listen to in order to live our lives according to said evidence. That is a moral claim.
Yeah, but I can't prove that that's unique to me. I don't speak Orca or elephant for that matter.
You're holding me to that standard.
The point is, I'm saying, I simply asked. I didn't say your belief was invalid. I am saying outside of our ingenuity and our collective ability to believe in fiction and what we have done with that, what we have built with that, the only other foundation for your belief would be the idea that we are created in the image of God, because nothing else can be proven.
Well, number one, I think it's inescapable in the sense of like when we are, if you're asking me questions, we're holding to a standard of what's true and false, because in order to ask questions, you have to have a standard of what even makes sense. And to have a standard of what makes sense and to hold somebody to their standard means that if they are wrong, they ought to accept that they are wrong, and they ought to change their mind from the wrong opinion to the right opinion. So even
Yep, I think that's pretty evident. Rob Webster says, I don't believe in evil people. I believe that people who do things that I find immoral exist, but I do not see as inherently evil. I do not seethe as in it typed out as seethe, so I wonder if she's like driving in her car and texting. Don't drive and text, Robin. So I'm gonna read that again. Do not see them as inherently evil. But when you have a moral system, you said things that I find immoral. When you constructed your moral system, did you use reasons to construct your moral system, or did you not use reasons? She says, I believe that following evidence gives us fallible beings a more realistic view of the world. Okay. So you believe that there is value to a more realistic view of the world that people ought to follow? See, okay. So she meant to say see them instead of seethe. Yeah. So I think in each of these cases, if you used reasons to come to your moral system, then that means there is something external to you that is prescriptive for what moral systems ought to be, and you've recognized it. And if you didn't use reasons to come to your moral system, then why do you have that moral system? What is the justification for your moral system?
Well, that's where you mistake me for being up here trying to debate you, because I'm not. I'm up here just having a conversation. I think most of my questions have been actually more like chasing rabbit trails than actually addressing the debate topic. And that's
Peter, good to see you again on Sunday night.
Probably because I'm asking what I'm curious about. I'm not up here trying to invalidate you or convert you or anything else. So save that for somebody who's trying to, okay?
Well, when he's saying like, well, if you have no evidence of that, and you admit you have no evidence of that, and it's just your presuppositions, it just sounds like what you're saying is there is nothing external to you or yourself that you can point to, and that's actually your position. That is just your private beliefs that you can't actually point to.
I don't think.
Okay, I understand. No, hold on. I understand where that came across condescending, because I often leave myself open to misinterpretation. So please allow me to clarify.
Sure.
I don't doubt that what you are presupposing in this conversation has taken you a long time to build the foundation for. I don't doubt that each one of those presuppositions you have brought to the table.
I would love to have this convo with you one day, but too busy today. Understood, Robin. I'm not going to work out your thumbs, because it's obviously a disadvantage between having a microphone and then having thumbs. So, but if you take the effort to put out your comment, I will respond to it, and yeah, we can go from there.
Have been backed by evidence that you consider good evidence. I'm not trying to invalidate that. I am just saying, in order for me to look at your argument and make sense of it in my mind, right, I would have to accept the presupposition that I am created in the image of a deity, and the one thing, the only difference that I know of that I can distinguish myself from a large portion of the animal kingdom with is my ingenuity and my ability to believe and create things that don't exist in my immediate reality, right? And so outside of those things.
Okay, but I would say that anything a non-theistic person could point to as far as the differences and why they do what they do. They could talk about these things as like taxonomy of abilities of different creatures, but what I have yet to hear is a justification for their value system in terms of, okay, you can create things, should you not? We talk about how the way things ought to be, politically, but anyway, I made that point. I'm gonna let her talk.
There's nothing that I can scientifically pinpoint to with any accuracy of knowledge rather than belief that would say, yes, this is the actual thing that makes me not an animal.
If
That's
by
all
science
I'm
you
saying.
mean testable and repeatable things within matter, no, I don't make that claim.
Peter says Pixie doesn't grasp basic philosophical concepts. I don't know if that's the case because I've not had a full-on philosophical conversation with her. She seems decently read as far as animal sciences go. I think she is an animal enthusiast. I haven't heard her go deep into philosophy much myself either, but I know she's friends with Aiden Linden. She's friends with Maud, myself, and she's probably been on Taco. I don't know if she's been on Breakfast Tacos or not, but I think if I had to guess, she's probably been in the chat for that as well.
You can test and repeat with matter those claims I'm talking about for morals. I never claimed anything like that. But what I am saying is that I don't think even you would say that an animal can carry moral weight like a human could. Maybe I'm wrong about that, but you let me know.
I don't think that it would be the same, right? I think that's like me saying that a Christian can hold a Muslim value code. It doesn't work that way. Do they have morals?
Well, the morals that judge humanity would be objective. So unless there's going to be an objective moral code, that would have to mean that animals were also made in the image of God and correspond to an ultimate evaluator of moral oughts and ought-nots. Rev Russ here was in the show, says animals are clearly different than humans and held to very different standards. For example, dogs, dolphins, and other species are known for mounting animals of other species with no sign of consent. Yes, that's true. And also, all animals, if we held them to the same standard, would be given a ticket for indecent exposure.
Values? Maybe. Does it look like mine? No. Why? Because they're not me. Why would I expect them?
Okay. But no other human is you either. So why is the shared humanity an indication of how somebody ought to live? And if that's true, does a shared species, whatever that would be in the evolutionary continuum, does a shared species have an isolated value set and value system that is unique to them that binds those within that species? And is every species its own kind of moral island that is just out there in the ocean, not connected to other moral species? Do some moral species, do some moralities between species collide with each other? These are all very interesting questions to delve in if this is the moral model to go by.
To mimic my value system. And so whether it is like mine versus whether they have one are two completely different concepts. And I don't think that I can accurately answer that because, again, I don't speak their languages.
Can I jump in here? So, you're using human behavior to define humans as close to God, but, you're not going into the animal world. And this is a great comment that this unapologetic preacher has made, by the way. You're not going into each species and showing how their morality within their own living unit works. Or, and another thing I want to add is, when you're saying we're creating,
I mean, I wouldn't see the relevance even if I did that, because even if even if there were different moral systems between animals that differed from us and coexisted alongside us as actual moral systems in which there was culpability, innocence, guilt, and things like that, all that would prove is that morality exists. And I'm using animals as a contrast from humans because morality exists with humans. But if morality existed with animals, it wouldn't be better for the atheist. It would just show that there are things that have to do with how people ought to interact, or even how animals ought to interact. So all you're doing is adding oughts upon oughts. You're not actually making it easier for atheism. You're making it harder.
Created in the image of God. You're just basically inventing a God there, right? I mean, what you really mean is Jesus, right?
Well, I don't believe that I'm creating a God. And what was your first? You're saying that I'm anthropomorphizing animals
Yes,
when I do
yes.
that?
I mean, you're using human behavior to define the fact that animals don't have morality and these different things that you were talking about.
So, but the problem is, if you look at different cultures within humans, we also judge other cultures, and we even internally critique our own culture, right?
Right.
So are we using a standard when we do internal critiques or intercultural critiques? A standard that transcends.
We can do both, right?
Right.
Yep.
And that's what I did with Andrew, for example. He claims to be Christian. I'm looking at an internal critique of his thing and saying, okay, well, part of Christianity is the Bible, the infallible word of God, which we hold to. And therefore, I'm holding you to a standard showing that what
Now, you see Doom-based comment? Rev Russ is pointing out, hey, animals try to mate with animals outside their species without the consent of those animals. And Doombase says, you think people don't mount other animals without their consent? The difference, of course, is in this planet, humans are morally culpable for doing those things, whereas animals are not. I guess Doombase either wanted to make a joke or didn't grasp that.
Saying here is wrong. But I'm pointing to something outside of myself and outside of yourself. So obviously you and I would have different understandings of ethics. And when we have conversations, we point to things outside of ourselves in order to challenge each other. We don't point to ourselves to do that. And so even if, so there has to be a tiebreaker here if we're going to say, well, Patrick, re-examination, whatever, here's what you're doing, and I want to scrutinize what you're doing by a standard that exists not only outside of yourself, but outside of myself. So when we do that, we're making a claim beyond, well, these are just phenomena within species. We're going beyond that.
Do you think that sacrificing your resources to help something clearly struggling simply to extend its life for the benefit of the whole is a moral thing to do?
Yeah, so it would be a moral thing to do for moral agents, but seeing as animals aren't moral agents, I think that would just be a reflection of the goodness of God that is shown in some animals. Now, a lot of animals obviously are, if the same actions were done by humans, it would be deemed as cruel. But we can see those things and we evaluate those things as sweet and nice from animals, but they are not actually heroes. They're just doing what's already in their demeanor and in their nature. It's not the same thing as if a human does it, because there's actual moral significance to what humans do.
Yeah, I think it's a moral thing to do, but here's the difference, because if you're gonna extrapolate that to animals, I think that also communicates the thing about the God that made those animals. The animals are not made in the image of God, but the animals themselves are made by God, and God.
I wasn't going to relate that to animals. I was actually going to relate that to plants, believe it or not.
Okay. That would cover plants too.
Yeah, they're God's creation. This is the Francis of Assisi argument.
Doggos love saving people and eating them. Yes, that's true. You want to save your food for later, don't you?
Look, I just think, let me just recap slightly, if I may. So,
Yeah.
I don't think you addressed Pixie's argument on the face of it. She's making an inductive argument to say, look, when you look at the history of how the humans were differentiated from animals, it turns out that most of those presuppositions that were made were incorrect. And
I don't.
in fact,
Even if.
hang on.
Sorry.
Let me get to the end because
I'm sorry.
I'm going to summarize your position as well. So I think that's her basic argument, right? Is to say, look, there's been this constant move towards saying that humans are not animals, and as such, the more scientific information that's come in, the less that distinction and the grayer that distinction has become, to the point where we're looking at, as Big Bad Mama said, we're looking at things which, from a human perspective, and saying, well, we can't imagine that they've got these particular traits. But that's an argument from ignorance. So I wouldn't.
Okay. So I wonder if they think it would be absurd to put a chimpanzee in handcuffs and then bring him on trial or anything like that. I think they would admit that there's nothing in anything that Pixie said or anybody else could say about the state of animal behavior that would necessarily lead people to think there needs to be a justice system or a moral accountability or a philosophy of ethics concerning animals and how animals ought to treat us. It's just animals do what they do. They're part of the ecosystem, but we are above the ecosystem.
Accept that. That's just on Pixie's worldview, as far as I can tell. I mean, she can correct me in a minute when I'm wrong. But from your point of view, you're saying, look, we have a deductive argument here, which says we're made in the image of God. And that's what is the distinction between ourselves and animals. We've been given reason.
And that's expressed, not just in reason, but also in moral agency.
Although we're created, although we're all creations of God, there's a distinction here. And that's that we're in the image of God and the animals are not. Right. So I think that's your basic argument as far as I can tell. And if such, you're just talking past each other then, because that's no response to Pixie's argument. As her response to you is not addressing your argument.
Well, I guess, if he would have you're right. If he would have presented an inductive argument, I probably would have responded with deductive reasoning, right? But he presented a deductive argument, and I was trying to use inductive reasoning to see where it breaks down. But I don't think I can because I don't share his presuppositions, and that's all I got to, and that's fine.
Exactly.
And we can just agree and disagree on that.
So that's why you're talking past each other. I think you didn't address Pixie's problems to do with why is it.
I did say. Hold on though. I did say that I don't think that the whole tools and the community and all that stuff. I don't think that even when it was presented initially that it was a good argument that would. Because having a community, it's possible. I mean, they knew where there were flocks of birds hundreds of years ago, and that's you could argue that's a community. So, and the flock, flew together.
It's not about community. The Pixie's argument is one that says no. We used to deny the.
None of this is addressing moral agency or culpability of animals and how that, and the reason I'm saying this is because, again, all of those were claims that were made on things that could be falsifiable on the scientific, testable, repeatable level. Moral agency cannot.
Commonality between humans and animals, and it was done on all levels. At first, she said they couldn't reason. Yeah, they can reason. But then it was said, well, they don't have language. Yeah, they have language. Then it was said they're not tool users. Well, then we found out they are tool users. Then they said, right. So there's a whole history here of certainly Christians, as it was mainly.
I mean, you could say, well, we thought thunder was Thor. We found out it's not Thor. We thought, the volcano was a god, and we found out it wasn't a god. We thought the moon was a god. It's not a god. I mean, it's like all these things where it's like, these weren't even good or compelling ideas anyway on their own. So debunking a bunch of bad ideas does not make a good idea part of the collection of bad ideas.
Christians around saying, look, there's no connection, right? This was a denial of evolution, early denials of evolution, right? So there's a whole history. In order for this to make sense, hang on a minute.
Okay.
There's a whole history here of a movement in one direction, which is towards
on a different continuum than I'm talking about. The movement in one direction What I also would say that there's anyway.
Animals becoming, or science finding out that animals are much more like humans than we ever imagined. And the last few bastions, if you want to put God in, if you want to say we're different, is just a gaps argument. Right? I'm not going to say the G word there, but it's a gaps argument. So I don't think you've addressed Pixie's argument as such. However, that's not to say that she's addressed your argument either, right?
Certainty exists. 888. Your exam. Nice to see you critiquing. Thanks. Certainty, would you be willing to jump on the panel? I don't know if Peter's still with you guys, but I was thinking about doing a panel tonight before Rex and Rev. There was a certain point I wanted to get to where it's 3 of them against me, which, I mean, it basically is 3-on-1 at this point. Peter is also here.
So,
all right. So here's what I would say to that. I think there's a difference in kind because all the things you talked about would be either falsifiable or they'd be falsifiable, right? We could check those out scientifically.
They're all falsifiable. They have been checked out. Yeah.
Yeah, but moral weight has not been falsifiable. You have to assume that moral mapping in order to have affirmed it. You have to act, but that can't be done on a scientific basis.
Right. So how would you falsify whether or not humans could incur moral guilt and animals could or could not have moral guilt in the scientific method?
By observation, of course.
So if I brought a scientist into a courtroom, the scientist could show me through science, through physical phenomena, the guilt or innocence of the person in the witness stand. Why haven't we been doing this the whole time instead of using people and other unreliable means? Like why do we even have to go through the lengths of getting DNA and fingerprints and testimonies and alibis and all this kind of stuff and swearing by this book or that book if all we had to do was just use science to figure out if somebody was morally guilty or not? Oh, certainty exists says, what time are you thinking? I mean, I don't know. Whenever, I mean, you could whenever you're ready. I was planning on reviewing this up for a while, and I've pushed back Rex and Rev till 8:30 because Rev is usually available a little bit later these days on Sunday nights. So you guys let me know. But Peter and Certainty definitely would be cool to have you guys on panel and discuss moral argument.
Hypothesis and observation.
So how do you
expect? What would we expect if they did feel moral guilt?
Oh, not feel, but have it. Because you can feel moral guilt that isn't real.
Well,
there's a difference between the feelings of guilt, the feelings that are associated with guilt, and the guilt status itself. The status of being a guilty individual is not the same thing as feeling guilty.
You do that all the time.
Based on behavior.
Right, it's behavior, yeah. That's how we
observe
things.
But that wouldn't be actual. Okay, I'm talking about actual moral guilt, the ones that you could.
Again, to say something is based on behavior when that behavior is not necessarily reflective of a moral reality, you have to have something reliable. You have to have something one-to-one. It's begging the question to say that morality isn't real because morality is feelings or whatever, or that guilt. I feel guilty, therefore I am guilty. No, it's either some equivocation or some kind of assumption that because all we are matter, therefore the feelings represent the morality. You have to first prove that all we are matter. But moral realism, doesn't allow you to do that, I don't think. At least not a moral realism that I'm familiar with that makes sense. I mean, let's see if I can find. I actually think I have the link to. I think it was. What's his name? T-Jump. So T-Jump has a website, and we're gonna go there real quick. So this is T-Jump's website. If you haven't seen T-Jump, he is an atheist. I think he has some right-wing leanings, but I don't know. So here's his decision tree for what is moral and immoral, and he believes that morality and immorality are measured by if you cross against somebody's will. If somebody has a will to do something, anything, and there is a circumstance or a person or anything that crosses that will, that thing, that person, that action is immoral. Now, in that way, thoughts can't be immoral. You cannot have immoral thoughts in this, because I asked him and he said there are no thought crimes. That's how he phrased it, as if I was talking about crimes instead of morals. But step one, he goes, are you imposing on someone? I'm just going to pick all the ones that he thinks are bad. So I'm going to go, yes. he says, is the imposition voluntary? I'm going to go no. And then step 3, is the imposition necessary to prevent a greater imposition? Which I don't know how you determine what a greater imposition is from an objective standpoint, because we're not objective. So I'll go no. And then he says, action is not allowed. Now, he doesn't believe in a prescriptive, or at least he declares himself to not believe in a prescriptive normativity of morality, which I think is weird. It doesn't make any sense. I think it's just definition swapping of prescriptive and descriptive. All you've done is make morality descriptive when you say immorality is a crossing of somebody's will or denial of somebody's will. And then therefore, but it doesn't have to be prescriptive but the problem is he says the action is not allowed. Okay. But who is preventing the action? You know, if there's no prescriptions for how somebody ought to live, then allowance of somebody's act isn't even in the question anymore. Now we're just describing things. Now, moral or immoral is just a description of whether or not somebody didn't get their way. But he says, this action violates the core tenets of imposition ethics and must be abandoned or modified. Penn rule, street level check. If you can get consent, get it. Never impose more than needed. Choose the least imposing option. I need to do some tongue exercises before these shows. Your freedom ends where another's harm begins. So it's kind of classically libertarian in some ways, or non-aggression principle-esque.
Actually say,
Peter says, I think T-Jump would be a terrible parent. You know, he might think that too, so he might not have any kids. Who knows? Bird says, pretty sure people with imposter syndrome feel a lot of guilt for seemingly no reason. Yeah.
So-and-so is guilty of theft. So-and-so is guilty of murder. Even if you want to make stipulations about killing or like espionage,
sure.
let's just put those aside for what we would agree to be absolutely wrong.
Well, just treat it unfairly, right? Just treat it differently. That's all you need. There are experiments that we would expect animals to act in a particular way if it's true that the
yeah, he's having the same struggles I am.
Reciprocity.
Reciprocity is, in fact, if animals have the moral of reciprocity, yeah.
But we would have
expect to see that.
In order to measure moral reciprocity, you have to have presupposed a moral system in the first place. You can't test the thing by assuming the thing, right?
In particular ways, and it would demonstrate itself in certain ways. Then we can,
at least not from an atheistic standpoint. I mean, from a Christian presuppositional standpoint, you have to, because you believe that God is the truth. You believe that if he made us in his image, then we are worth more than many sparrows, as Christ has taught us. So we have actual great worth, you know. It's not that we are great people, but because we are humans made in God's image, then we ought to respect each other based on the one we are made in the image of. And also that we have the recognition of God's handiwork in us, that we are supposed to rightly and justly dominate the earth. We are not animals. We are different and separated from animals. Animals just naturally fear us. Genesis 9, verse 2.
Go and set up an experiment to see what happens if under those circumstances. What do animals do under those circumstances? Particular animals. I'm not saying all. Particular animals do under those circumstances. And
you would have to have a moral construct in order a priori to that in order to even make that evaluation. It wouldn't be that you would be objectively looking at some kind of a periodic table of elements and saying this has this many subatomic particles and that has that many subatomic particles, and we can use these calculations. I agree. But what I'm saying is you don't have a testable, repeatable method to do that without a presupposition of what morals are and what value is.
That's what we use experiments for, right?
I don't understand what's the moral experiment. Like, do you do a blood test? Do you do an eye test? What is it?
Because we come up with a hypothesis, okay, and the hypothesis is they do in fact have some moral agency, right? And this is the moral.
Could somebody in the chat tell me how you scientifically prove moral agency, let alone the status of innocent, guilt, or righteousness?
Agency we expect, right? Under that expectation, we can devise an experiment to test whether they do behave.
Hit me with a link, brother. All right. Oh, hold up. Here we go. There we are. You should have it in the chat. Now, I'm not using StreamYard right now. So, but we will be available on YouTube, on Twitch, and on X. So go ahead, Peter, and certainty. You know, if you want to have a discussion, here we go.
In the way that would suggest that they understand reciprocity.
How would that not be meaningless, though?
What do you mean meaningless?
Meaning that if morality, how would you? What is the form? What are the scientific formulas for morality?
Right, reciprocity.
You're already assuming the value of reciprocity before beginning the experiment. How is this not circular?
That's what's being tested for.
How do you test reciprocity? Okay, so you are making a value judgment about reciprocity, whether it is right or wrong.
Whether it's moral, yeah.
Okay.
I mean, it says in the Bible that it is. So.
Hello, sir. How you doing?
Hey, man. How you doing? Good
Welcome to the show. Yeah, good to see you too. So you've been following along. What is your nutshell summary of what you've seen so far of this debate?
Well, I actually just popped on. I got some connection issues, but I'm trying to hang on with you. But I've dealt with these characters before. I mean, overall, it's going to be. Am I coming in okay? By the way, I'm a little.
Yeah, are you on the road?
Well, I'm in a car. I have to be in a car right now, but I'm not on the road. But this is the best I can get. But let me know if it's
No, you're good. You're good.
Okay. I've dealt with some of these cats before. I think the overall thing is that they have no ethical foundation. They want to keep going. And that's kind of the problem, is like the conversation is actually stopped right there in a way, because they just keep reverting back to this nothingness, and you have to keep stopping them and pointing them out. So even when you and I do a critique right now, we're gonna have to stop it every 2 seconds. You know what I mean?
I get it. I just want to hit as many bases, because part of this moral argument series has to do with this. In order for an atheist to use arguments, they have to assign moral value to all truth and all true things, and use that as a prescriptive instruction to how I ought to think and live. So
how if they going to get access to all truth as an atheist?
Well, don't ask me, ask them. But I'll give you a great example. If an atheist says, I got deconverted, I went through a deconstruction process because the evidence led me in that direction, what they're saying is truth is prescriptive, and I ought to respond according to what truth represents to me and tells me and informs me of. That is still a moral claim of responsibility, because it's a value claim, and it tells you what people ought to value. So when they come to you and try to perform their deconstruction process on you, what they're saying is you have an existing paradigmatic moral ought that I'm presenting to you, which should compel you to change your life in the way that I changed mine.
Absolutely. Well said, brother. Like that's what I was talking about that's the reason I want to talk to you. I think I heard you say that prior, and I'm like, somebody gets it on this level. This is key. This is absolutely key. They're trying to come in authoritative while acting, by the way, neutral the whole time, pretty much saying, oh, this is the way it is. There's that ought, that we ought to follow the true, which becomes a meta-ethical question, really, that gets ignored, and people just don't want to discuss it for some reason. And it's always present in all these conversations. So well said.
Thank you. I'm actually kind of working on formalizing it a little bit with some AI, because I don't have like the formal training on this, but I can show you a little bit of what I'm working on, show you a little bit of my cards. So we got core insight, starting point, truth is normatively authoritative, truth is not merely descriptive. Some of this is AI, so that's going to, be a little bit, they're not going to spell correctly. Universally binding, cognitive presupposition, every cognitive act engaging with any fact presupposes the authority of truth. You cannot think your way out of, I call it triage. So the truth, rationality, imperative argument for God's existence. It's different than tag, because what tag does is says you can't reason without God. But in triage, you have no reason to apply reason to your life without God. So which is separate, because it's a moral transcendental rather than a logical or thought-based transcendental. So I mean, there's a lot of ways of looking at it. So
sure, like you would still assume on that model that you can't reason without God and God's creation, but you're taking a different sort of approach there on expanding that out. So I think the atheist misconstrues that too. Often they're like, what do you mean I can't reason with God? I just reason, therefore you're stumped.
Therefore God doesn't exist.
yeah, it's over. It's like, come on, man. That's not what's being said here. It's the account. It's the epistemic justification for your reasoning itself. Reasoning is not neutral. Reasoning requires a reasoner's reasons. Those are their personal philosophies that they bring into the line of reasoning.
Well, not just that, it also includes value claims. To say that truth, we ought to go where the truth leads, is to make a value claim. So if I ask you, why should I value truth more than lies? You can't give me a reason for that, because you'd have to make a metaphysical claim for which material it gives no basis for.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So dilemma for the critic: when you tell me I ought to consider a view, what's within your ontology gives you the standing to make that claim. So let's say somebody says you ought to come over to my side, and I was like, okay, so if I come over to your side, what is the construct within your side that validates the claim that I ought to come to your side? Is there anything within your worldview that recommends people live one way and reject other ways? And if there is, what is that based on?
Yes, there's nothing binding that. All it is their own autonomous reasoning. It's all about them. It's a circle back to them and whatever they're calling them, by the way, which you can challenge them on that too. The metaphysics of being, right? Like, what is this thing that they call a reasoning being they give a name to? They have none of these answers. But the thing about challenging them on this level is it really, I think what happens is you start having to have the foresight for pointing out logical fallacies and missteps, because that's where these conversations lead. You end up teaching and you end up constantly pointing out logical fallacies, different deviations from what you're actually talking about the whole time. So it's quite a task you got on your hands, but I'm loving hearing from you, man. It's good stuff.
Appreciate it. Again, like, there was a while back where I was watching Planet Peterson. I'm sure you're familiar with Planet Peterson.
Yeah.
He's debated Jim Bob and others a few times. And
yeah, he's a smug little guy too. Oh.
Yeah. I will say I would rather hang out with him than Jake Rattlesnake, but that's a whole other dealio. But I don't know if you saw that whole thing, but I won't get into the race.
Jake, I think I know who Jake is. He's like the moderator. He also does debates, but he used to host them more.
Yeah. Well, he did a chop job on my first debate with Andrew on divorce and remarriage and whether or not, anyway, that's a whole other thing.
Well, you've been on with Wilson too. Yeah, that's awesome, man.
No, thanks. So here's a few of these other things, and I haven't constructed these. I just let AI do it. So it's going to be a little skewed, but naturalism, physical laws cannot issue commands or hold agents accountable. Pragmatism, truth is reduced to usefulness, which lacks objective authority over belief. Brute fact realism lacks a method to identify brute facts without becoming circular or arbitrary. Eliminativism, self-refuting, uses authority of truth to argue that truth has no authority. Constructivism, regress problem. What gives the constructed norm is authority. I mean, it just goes on and on. If you have the only problem I have with the argument I'm forming is it doesn't do the religion speed run in terms of like being conclusively Christ. That is a separate conversation. So what I'd have to do is attach another argument on top of that argument. But the problem, of course, is if I'm arguing for the existence of morality and arguing for the existence of a positive ID on which God is the true God, then that gives them room to run as far as many scriptures. Well, what about this passage, that passage? And then you'll never actually get to the point. So I have to kind of sacrifice specificity in order to highlight a very important point, which is atheists, even if they could engage in the logic of a debate and we grant them a grounding for logic, we don't have to grant them the compulsion that logic would have on any one person to do anything or think any differently. Or
you give them the toys, but you strip out the ethics, so it's neutralized. Brilliant.
Right.
I mean, you can always rely back on that if they want, because that's actually what they're insisting, because they keep ignoring it. So they're like, I want to keep talking, I want to keep arguing. It's like, well, I've already diffused you. In fact, you've diffused you. I'm just pointing it out. That's all I'm doing here. If you want to continue, yeah. That's.
I don't know.
But I think you can.
Oh, my bad. I thought you might continue with the review. Sure.
Yeah. Measure if the animal. I think you can measure. Hold on. I think you can measure if the animal feels guilt, right? Like
I'm not talking about feeling. Because you can feel false guilt. So outside of feeling, I'm talking about what is testable and repeatable.
I understand you what you're saying.
Yeah, it is testable and repeatable over and over again. If you are not equal with the animals, they will refuse. They will refuse to accept from you until you give the other animals the same amount. Or
doesn't prove
they
moral
will
agency.
they will give their stuff to the other animals.
That doesn't prove moral agency.
We don't need to go into the actual details.
I didn't say that. I said whether they feel.
Well, then, if you're not talking about actual moral agency, then what's the point? I don't like. Yeah, I don't understand. I don't understand. I think this is new. I think this is new for a lot of atheists. And I brought up Platt and Peterson earlier because I was in his comment section once, and I brought up 8 moral components to the practice of debate. One of them being honesty. And he looked at that and responded to my comment. I think the actual video was called "Morals Aren't Objective," and you know it, or something along those lines. And so I brought up honesty as one of the elements, and he said he looked at my list and he said none of these are moral. And I said honesty isn't moral. And of course, if you look down, I might even have the doc of that.
Well, hold on a second though. Morals aren't objective. Let's think about that claim itself, right? Like, what is the objective nature of that particular claim, and what is the proof that subjective morals are what exists?
Oh, you ought to believe that morals aren't real. That's what it boils down to.
Well, how do they have the information from their worldview of what is and isn't real and what is and isn't subjective? That doesn't even make sense.
I have no idea.
Well, they say you need to prove your objective moral, right? Typically.
Yeah.
Right.
They ask for evidence for everything.
Right. So they're assuming a subjective moral, and they're universalizing the idea. They're saying all morals are subjective. How would they have that knowledge? So it just goes back into their epistemology, really. Like, okay, you're trying to get me to prove an objective ethic or point to it. Am I supposed to do that the same way you point to subjective ethics? And also, how do you know? How can you make a universal claim about ethics, what they are, what that entails, and how all people only are limited to a subjective stance? There's just so many questions in there.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's why when you get into metaphysics, see, here's the thing. They think that if they can bring up more naturalistic studies, then that's going to be a slam dunk. The problem is they're giving significance. They're giving ideological significance to every node of data point in their studies. And we're supposed to believe we're supposed to believe those nodes, really. We're supposed to believe the value assignments and the conclusions they are sweeping along with that. And what we've realized over the decades is all of this is just framing. All of this is just value assignment, and all of this is just selling a paradigm in the shape of selling observations that anybody can look at. It's not the same thing. So when we start talking presuppositionally, they're going to accuse us of cheating and saying, no, now you know that you've lost when you've gone presup. It's like, well, no, we're addressing you at the level that you're actually at. You are using illustrations in the form of studies to persuade us of a particular interpretation of those studies. That's not the same thing as telling me why I ought to believe a certain way or telling me about the foundations of reality, which would help me to frame the kind of phenomena that we're talking about when it comes to animal behavior.
Yes, absolutely, man. You're pointing out the smuggle, and then you call them on the smuggle, which pulls you into presuppositions. And it's almost like when in that example, like they don't even see it. They haven't even realized yet. They have this value system that they just don't talk about or don't want to talk about because it's absolutely just granted. They've granted it to themselves.
It's uncomfortable. Yeah, and they have granted it to themselves. Yes. And that's why I try to have as much in common with them as possible because, without offending Christ, so that I can say, like, look, here's some sophistry that Andrew Wilson's been putting forward. He's a bad guy, I think, in the name of Christ. And that needs to stop. We need to call that out. And then I think that this is going to be a point of commonality that we're both, because they're going to be on the left. I'm on the right, but they're on the left, and they're going to be like, well, I don't like Andrew Wilson for different reasons. And it's like, okay, so we're making value claims here, and we're sharing these value claims. Is that based on, as I said before to Robin Webster in the comment section, are those value claims based on reasons? And if they're based on reasons, that means that there is something external to our thoughts that we use as a reference point to shape our thoughts. And if they're not based on reasons, why do you believe them? Why do you have that value set?
Nice.
Real quick, I'll show. This is I saved some of the comments here. This is what I said in my opening comment. I do believe objective morality exists, and so do you, which is the opposite of what his title was. Each and every one of his arguments and each supporting comment rests on the idea that 1, we ought to debate honestly. 2, we ought to believe true things. 3, we ought to not say false things. 4, there are right ways and wrong ways to think. 5, wrong ideas ought to be corrected. 6, there is value in thinking correctly. 7, we have a responsibility to promote correct thinking. 8, we cannot opt out of these imperatives and have personal integrity, etc. Bonus, God's the foundation of truth, because if we are universally and throughout time responsible to each other categorically as a species, then the foundation of truth must be personal, transcendental, and eternal, because you can't be accountable to anything impersonal. Accountability has to do with persons. Even the Old and New Testament, it distinguishes from moral, civil, and ceremonial law. This is not that hard for those honest enough to study a worldview on its own terms, instead of from the standpoint of jokers who haven't given it a serious read. Planet Peterson says, why does the Christian color then violate everyone? Oh, that's just some other guy. Where's Plant Peterson? That's what I want to know. Rand Encounter gives me, most of the usual things.
That comment there is so common, like go for the hypocrisy, not address it.
Right. So hypocrisy is always wrong objectively, right? It's like, okay.
Yeah, right. It's just it's like a vicious circle of thought. Yeah.
Yeah, like
they keep assuming the thing that they keep denying. That's the whole thing. That's exactly what they're doing. They're suppressing the truth and unrighteousness. Romans 1:18.
All right, check this out. So this is Planet Peterson right here. He says to me, not a single one of those things is the moral claim.
What?
Can you believe that?
No. I mean, I can, I guess, but at the same time, that's just such a ridiculous answer.
Oh, by the way, it's saying that your phone doesn't allow recording. Well, he dropped off. Certainty. Something happened with your phone there?
Yeah, it's a laptop, but that's never happened. I don't know. Maybe it's the type of stream you're using. I guess I'm not familiar with it. Or the laptop's not familiar.
Okay. So it says you're not being certainty. Let me. We might have to stop it there, because it's saying that you're no longer being recorded for some reason. So we might have to do a stream sometime where we're on StreamYard. StreamYard's a little bit better for this, unfortunately, but StreamYard is like twice the price of Riverside. So we'll have to set things up. It'd be cool if it was like you and Peter someday. We could have a discussion. But in the meantime, definitely looking forward to more work on that. So una momento, we will switch over.
Feel guilt or equity. And you can build on different things to comprise an understanding of their value system. And what is morality except our value system?
So would you be anthropomorphizing if you did that, or would that be an objective thing?
I think if you're watching what they do and not leading them to do it, then it's their behavior you're observing.
So it would be objectively observable, independent of anthropomorphizing it.
Not until I could learn to speak their language, but pretty close. Like it would be a very good educated guess.
Okay, but that would be based on our experience or based on things we intrinsically know about life in general? Like,
I think that's what we do. I think that's all we do with everything, be it religious or non-religious. I think that's the best we do with everything. What are you trying to get at?
So what I'm trying to get at is this. We're making value claims about behaviors and feelings, and I think we can agree that there's such a thing as false guilt, like cults use false guilt all the time. You might even say religion uses false guilt. Would that
so you
be
mean
agreeable?
Conviction? You mean how do we test if they have conviction?
I'm differentiating false guilt from true guilt. So, for example, if there really is a moral law out there that you can violate and the feeling that you have corresponds to a moral reality, I'm talking about the moral reality of the thing. I'm not talking about the feeling of the thing.
Yeah, but that, again, I'm not expecting their morality to look like mine. They are not humans. If you are looking at an animal...
But is their morality as valid as mine? Is it as real as mine? Or is it just feelings? They're just feelings. Your own personal feelings.
Expecting a human moral system, I think you are failing. Right?
Well,
that doesn't mean I can't look at them and see that they have a culture and a consistent value system. And what do we call our consistent culture and value system to humans? Morality. So do I expect their morality to mimic mine? No. But does the lack of their morality mimicking mine exactly mean that they don't have one? Also, no.
Great. So when it comes to holding somebody's feet to the fire as a human-to-human basis, then you would say that you're doing something beyond your own personal, private, moral construct. You're doing something that is beyond yourself, and is you're using some objective standard to say this is how it ought to be. Or are you just saying this is how it is and people ought to conform to how it is? Because if you're saying that our moral structure comes from just our species instinct, then we're just making a statement of the outcomes of genetics playing upon
Who said
life.
anything about instinct? If it was instinct, then every little group would have the same moral system, and we have found that they don't. So we can't blame instinct on this. Much like not every group of humans has the same moral system. Christians don't share a moral system with Muslims, and Muslims don't share a moral system with secular humanists. It doesn't work that way. It doesn't mean that these are not moral systems.
Right,
Yeah,
right.
Again,
But you would say that you would use reason to critique other moral systems, right?
well, so do they if they've decided they don't want to be like the other monkey.
So what's the tiebreaker between your critics and then your criticisms of them? What would be the tiebreaker? That's always the question between two competing moral systems or two competing reasoning systems.
Group.
But then
That's what I'm saying. Just because it doesn't look like mine
Looks like I already said that.
doesn't mean it's not there.
Oh, I agree that it's there. The question is it right? Because if you're going to hold it to a standard of evidence, that means
I don't know that mine is right. I don't know that yours is right. How am I supposed to tell you if theirs is right? I'm not a monkey. Maybe it is right for monkeys. Maybe group A is right and group B is almost right. I don't fucking know. I'm not a monkey.
I mean,
So let's say we're both wrong.
Morality is not just genetic.
Let's say we're both wrong.
It has to do with our culture and ourselves through our individual experience as well.
Well, anybody can have an individual experience within a culture. Anybody can be a reject in one's own culture, but that doesn't mean that it's good to reject people or it's good to ostracize people in your culture. It also doesn't mean that it's good to be a dejected, retaliatory rebel within somebody's culture either. So what does the judging in this case?
As well as our genetics. So, you can't reduce morality in humans down to just one thing.
Okay, well, let's say we're both wrong. Ought we use reason to find out what is right?
Yes.
That's
why.
odd.
Because they're subjective. Our morality is subjective. So, of course, we would use reason to determine.
Okay, so if our morality is subjective, how could reason lead to a subjective stance? Like if reason is objective, and then, all right, we'll try again, JG. Oh, where'd he go? Are you there, sir?
Hey, man.
Hey.
All right. Thanks, man. I don't know. It might phase out again, but give it a go.
All right, we'll give another shot. Yeah. Oh. It says your recording has stopped. So, I mean, here's the problem. It's telling me that even though you're on the show, yeah, we're going to have to try this when I'm on StreamYard. I'm sorry, sir. We're going to have to try this when you're on StreamYard. I'd have to set up a different stream altogether for this. But again, appreciate you for dropping in. So just to catch up, he says that we can use reason to arrive at our morality, and everybody has a different morality. But if reason is the same across the board, is objective, is binding and transcendent, we would have to come to the same morality based on his point of view, right? I mean, in my worldview, people reject God. People reject the truth. People have gone their own way based on their own predilections. That would make sense as to what we see today, and which is why even though we share the same universe with the same logical laws and the same humanity and the same human value, we go off in different directions. It's because of sin.
Whether our morality is in line with what's happening with other people or in our families or in society.
And then using reason would be pointing to something outside of us that would give us answers we cannot provide ourselves, right?
Whoa.
Not necessarily, no.
Yeah.
So reason can be entirely within myself and be just as valid as an objective standard outside myself.
Well, it depends whether it corresponds to it or not.
I think
okay, so it is outside yourself.
I think anybody
depends.
I think
depends on your moral system. Number one, and which we're not defining, right? Number two, like if you want to bake.
Okay, is the moral ought that I ought to use good reason inside myself, or is it outside myself? If it's inside myself, does that mean it's subjective? And then if it's outside myself, does that mean it's objective? Either way, you have an ought that you're proposing exists. And then now we're just trying to figure out how that actually really works.
The question of God is the only way you can ground things, then that's all right, but that's special pleading. So I'm not that interested in having that conversation, at least going down where it is. And then thirdly, we're making this is an inductive argument that's being made here, and you still haven't really addressed that. You've just claimed that there's no ontology for the idea of morals other than the human one.
When I got positive,
on top of that, keep this move.
Oh gosh, we got 3-on-1. Okay.
I disagree with that on the basis that, like I just told you, there is a hypothesis which has been, there's an observation which has been made, a hypothesis has been drawn. If it is the case, right, and prediction made, and if it is the case that all of those things lead to the conclusion that reciprocity is in fact demonstrated by behavior in these animals, right, then there is a case, right? Not saying it proves it in the sense of deduction. It's an
abductive. Yes, Shapingro. I've been working on an argument, and when I get the notation together, maybe you'd be interested in looking at it because you actually look at that. Thanks for your exam. I'll catch up with you later. Yeah, if you're on Discord, you can catch me on Discord at oh gosh, what is my tag name there anyway? It's a good question. Yeah, reexamination _show on Discord if you want to reach out. Inductive requires some set of natural numbers as a ground set. Shapingro is the math guy, in case you guys don't know, math and logic.
Inductive argument.
But he is not a theist, neither is he a Christian. Marsha and me, how you doing? How you doing? Welcome to the show. I've been meaning to cover this because it was a 3-on-1. You know, we were supposed to be all reviewing the Andrew debate together, and we did that, and that was all fun and games. And then, wouldn't you know it, it's time to deconvert the Christian.
But there's a case that says if we can repeat that through various species and amongst various members of species, then that shows it's more likely to be the case that these animals do have some moral code, even if it's some simplistic moral idea and not anything as complex as humans get to.
Which doesn't answer the question of whether morality is valid or real at all. Even if you want to say that there is behavior, is number one, that behavior existence itself does not. Hold on. Can I? Okay, I've had to.
Sorry, mate. It doesn't matter because you agree.
It totally matters.
You agree from your perspective that morals do exist and they are part of reality, correct?
Yeah, and I would argue that everyone on this panel does as well.
And that's all we're talking about. That's all we're talking about. We're not talking about the grounding. Right, the ontology. We're talking about an inductive argument that shows that they have this behavior. Okay.
Right, and we were attributing a value to this behavior that they may or may not attribute to it or be even aware of.
Back when I was the Bex Factor, yes, you were. He's a dirty apostate. Hey Rex, I was wondering if I recall correctly, were you the one that joined me on my live stream to talk about my theories on sexual dimorphism in humans? If I did, I forgot about it. I mean, I understood you to be a theist of some kind. Maybe I'm wrong. Gosh, that was probably a long time ago. How can you be a math guy and not be a theist? Well, it depends on whether or not you believe in a Petersonian version of God, I suppose.
That they're just happenstance performing out a set of behavior.
Good point, certainty exists. To say something doesn't matter is to differentiate it from things that matter.
Behaviors, and we're saying that's moral, and we're just saying it.
I actually think
we define that as moral. That's the point.
I actually think morals are incredibly subjective, and I don't think that even if you claim an objective source, you can claim any sort of objective morality, because the act of processing from that objective source is subjective in its.
Okay, let's address this objective, subjective. If it is subjective or if it's stance dependent, it requires a mind, therefore it's not objective. Even if that were the case on a terminological basis, even if that were the semantic rubric with which we were having to work within, then the Venn diagram of subjective and objective becomes a complete circle when the mind in question is the truth itself. So if you want to call truth subjective because truth is dependent upon the mind of God, you can do that so long as you admit honestly that it operates as objective morality and objective reality, therefore nullifying in that particular case the distinction between subjective and objective. And so you have a distinction without a difference in the case of God. Preacher's wife said, Russ just got back from mowing the lawn and said to let you know he will be online shortly. Well, okay, I will drop the link in Discord for him if he wants to join this, and then we can go to Rex and Rev later on. But that's up to him. This is a separate show, but he is totally welcome. Thank you, Preacher's wife. If any of you guys didn't know, Rev Russ is a preacher, and that's his wife. Martian Mean says, not a theist, but I think it was you. Okay. It's interesting. Who was I even talking to? Because I thought we were in Missing Mod's Discord and you were saying religious sounding things. And that doesn't mean you're a theist. The way it came across, so let's just say there are some people in churches who talk the way you talked. Yeah. I feel bad for you, you have to contend with some real suits on this panel. Do I read that upside down? Is there some kind of code? Maybe he means pseudos. Who knows?
And were it not subjective, these perfect morals would have remained the same throughout all of history. But we don't see that even with a quote unquote objective source.
Okay. If I said to you, the laws of logic are subjective because how people have used logic has changed throughout time, would you buy that? I don't think you would. Well, because we can use fallacies, therefore it proves that there are no laws of logic and that logic is not absolute. Because people have made mistakes in the past, whether it be moral or logical or philosophical or scientific, therefore it proves the subjectivity of the topic in question. That doesn't follow.
Why? Because objective as your sources is everything is processed subjectively. So even if you claim an objective source, and even if I grant that, I don't think
oh my goodness, I got that totally backwards. I am a theist. I heard atheist. Silly me. I thought so. Oh, and Preacher's wife, if Rev is back at the computer, let him know I dropped the link in the Discord if he wants to join this philosophical discussion. Did you guys know that Rev Russ actually won his VK, his very first VK victory, verbal combat that is, over on Speakeasy's channel, was Philosophy Night, even though he's more into theology. Everyone is a presuppositionalist at the end of the day. That's true. Everyone is a theologian. Everyone's a philosopher. Everyone's a presuppositionalist. We all come to the table with our own baseline assumptions and axioms and presuppositions about the world, ourselves, and each other. To be clear, says Marcia, I'm a faithful woman, although I've never been baptized. I spent a lot of time in churches with friends and friends' families. Well, not knowing where you're at, I would not necessarily know whether to encourage you to get baptized or not. It totally depends on multiple things. Peter says, I agree, but they wouldn't understand that. Yeah, just because there is a law that you have an option of breaking in your mind, it doesn't mean that the law ceases to exist. And I don't mean civil law. I mean like laws about reality, laws of logic, laws of morals, you name it.
Anyone has an actual objective morality or is even capable of it. So
you have to, on that scale, you'd have to claim the same thing about knowledge, that because we encounter the reality subjectively because we're not omniscient, therefore we also can apply that same thing. We can't have knowledge either.
I've always said that. I've always said I do the best I can with reasonable beliefs and what I'm convinced of and not, but I do not pretend to hold the truth any more than you do. I have said that over and over again. Nice to meet you.
Okay, well, I'm not trying to come at you with any bitterness, Pixie. I'm just trying to, now that I'm in a panel where I was trying to talk about my debates with Andrew, where I'm doing an internal critique of Christian nationalism, it turned into this whole thing. But I'm not trying to.
Well, I mean, we can disagree with you and Andrew, right?
Yeah, you are free.
Yes, but the whole thank you, nice to meet you thing was just a dig. It wasn't really contributing to the greatness of the conversation, I would say. Shapingro says, as mortals, we have only a better or worse view of the infidelity stacked turtles. No one can prove there is a flaw, or if they can, no one has accomplished it yet. So I'm guessing that if you had to pick from Agrippa's trilemma, you would pick the turtles. You would pick the infinite regress. We can know what has been revealed to us by God, says Peter. You know, I don't know if Peter has a better connection than Certainty Exists, but we can do that sometime. And if you guys want to organize a panel, I'm more open to the idea of panels coming up. Is just usually what panels turn into is a bunch of food fights, and that's what I want. Content that actually is going to be helpful to people. And most online panels are great for numbers. They're not great for like, hey, remember that episode where people just yelling at each other and slap fighting? Yeah, let's watch that again. Like, I don't think anybody finds a whole lot of value in that. But I think you guys are cut above. So, Chap. New name is Chap.
To disagree. What I'm saying is that if you're going to say that, well, I can do the best I can with reason, but also I can't absolutely know what truth is or knowledge is or reason is because I have experienced it subjectively, then it kind of nullifies the point of why you would critique anybody else, because you can't even make sense of internal critiques of your own.
Not being able to attain perfection has never negated the value in trying to better oneself in one's understanding ever. I don't think I can have perfect knowledge, but I think if I'm not learning every day, then I am not doing I'm doing something not right, or at least I'm doing myself a disservice. And so that's just a separate issue.
Wasn't Chappie a fighting robot in a Hugh Jackman film? It asked me to download another browser I was checking on joining. Yeah, again, that's the problem with Riverside. I would use StreamYard, but again, if I want to use StreamYard to send to multiple platforms, it's like twice the price of Riverside.
Together.
So when you say learning, are you talking about learning about things that are real?
I also, if not for the fact that it was called Restream sounds like it's a rerun, like it's not live. Restream puts that watermark on your thumbnails that says Restream on it. They need to change the name of that company. It's a stupid name.
Or are you talking about accumulating ideas?
Both.
Okay. So, but you would say that learning about things that are actually true and real, stands independently, has more value than just ideas that may or may not even be real. Right?
No, I think we're inherently story.
Back that up.
Actually true.
Both.
Okay. So, but you would say that learning about things that are actually true and real, stands independently, has more value than just ideas that may or may not even be real. Right?
No, I think we're inherently.
Guys, I didn't know what to do with that. I mean, I know what to do with it, but I didn't think she was going to give that answer. It feels like it seems like it's the wrong answer, because even if she's going to say that we're storytellers, if the stories tell us something that's false or use analogies to lead us to a false conclusion, then wouldn't you think that you would want the story to be sending you the right message to the right conclusion? Because ultimately, if it leads nowhere, then what makes one story better than another story? What makes Christianity better or worse than whatever story you do or don't currently believe?
Currently storytellers, and before we developed a written system, we depended on stories and an oral tradition to not only convey history, but our systems of morality, our systems of our sense of justice, all kinds of things. And it wasn't always done through like the most accurate storytelling, right? Like nobody was going around reciting the journals of Lewis and Clark. There was a lot of fiction put in there to really illustrate the message that they were trying to send behind the story, rather than just the events that happened itself. And I think that sometimes we relate best to stories. I think sometimes we even process the atrocities of humanity through fiction a lot more sanely and a lot more healthily than we do when we're confronting it from us ourselves. And so I think that both hold an immense amount of value. And I don't know what you mean by that.
Okay, thinking that it holds value is different than proving that it has value. And I don't claim you can do that with scientific means. I think you have to understand that in light of the fact that you cannot have debate without morality being true. It's a pretty good baseball movie, says Peter. Kevin Costner, he plays a fictional pitcher in the Tigers. His name is Billy Chappell. They call him Chap a lot. The more you know. Field of Dreams? The more you know.
Well, first of all, I'd like to take this opportunity to say that I do share an appreciation for fiction like you do. Like you had that Stephen King stream. That was pretty cool. But I will also say that in order to say what you just said, you would have to believe that your anthropology that you just gave was true and not merely an idea that you could not be wrong on. You're making an actual claim based on something you know to be real, right?
Well, yes and no. Like I said, I think it's mixed, right? For example, I think a volcano eruption that horribly destroyed an entire region can be mixed with the idea of two deities battling and the destruction that resulted from it, so that you are recording both the event that happened in an artistic, poetic way and some value or moral system you're trying to hold on to from that community at the same time. And so it's neither true nor false, right? It's something in between. And I think we as humans have a natural inclination to do this.
To say it's neither true nor false is to say this. The story itself is not true, but the point, the gravity of it, the message of the story is true and is representative of something that is transcendent. I can agree that that is true in one sense and not true in another. But you still have to make a value judgment as to, number one, what I ought to believe is true or not, and number two, that I ought to believe that the point of the story, if it is a good story based on an objective standard, would be valid and good for me to believe. Justified true belief is necessary but not sufficient. Knowledge and truth remain aloof to our attempts to pin them down. Chipingro, I have to fight the temptation to ask you if that's true or not, and if it's justified and all that kind of good stuff. But I'm focusing more on the moral argument that I am the presuppositional argument for logic, naturalism. It remains aloof from those who don't believe in God. So, I mean, Chipingro, let's put it this way. Did you use reason to find what has value and then use those values you discovered to constellate your moral map of the universe and what you ought to prioritize over other things? That's one way I would ask you. I prefer an epistemology based on consistency, but then you can get absurd yet consistent systems of truth. Correct. Right.
So what's the system that tells you the volcano thing was real and the things that they attribute to the volcano were not? Because then you'd have to say there's a fixed system by which you know things.
Your own experience. Well, it's all based on your own experience. If you're 3
So why can't somebody say, I have an experience, therefore God?
years old, you're not going to know that. But if you've seen volcanoes and you have this experience, then you know it to be true. You know it to be reality.
Yeah, but if I told you I had some kind of supernatural experience, you wouldn't believe me, even though that we're both humans.
You'd have to provide evidence for it.
How do you learn?
So there's an outside standard that we can know.
I have to. You caught that. Again, I'm not even doing tag from the sense of, I'm doing what I call triage, the truth, rational, imperative argument for God's existence, where the fact that we have to live according to what is true and real, and we have to reject what is false, is a moral claim that is embedded in debate and discussion and discovery itself. EOD says, it's absurd to think that the church couldn't evolve over 2,000 years. EOD in the house. Amazing. How you doing, sir? How is life? I think this is the first time you've been on my stream, EOD. Good to see you. Been a long time since my first hello on the Rob North show, and you were there too. You were one of the callers. I remember.
Ask you a question? Can I ask you a question? How
your own personal experience.
How do you learn to pick out literary tools in what you read? How do you know what the pathetic fallacy Charles Dickens is using symbolizes? How do you know why certain things were personified a certain way to represent different people in Animal Farm? How do you know Trotsky's not an actual pig, but or Snowball's not an actual pig, but a representation of Trotsky? And why was he a pig in the first place of all the animals? How do you learn to interpret these things? How do you understand literary devices? You learn about them.
At some point, all you're doing is pointing to that people use illustrations to give significance or to represent significance in a communicable way that is engaging to other people and memorable to other people, which is a good technique. But what we're talking about is the significance, not the window dressing we put on the significance or the patina we put on top of it. We're talking about what matters the most.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, maybe those are human conventions, but a volcano is not a human convention.
Springer says, based on ZFC, I don't know what that is, I can prove that 100% of all real numbers have never be seen or conceived by humans. Every number you have ever considered is algebraic or at least computable. Okay, yeah, I totally accept that.
No, but watching a volcano erupt and looking at an abstract poem that describes what you're seeing, but in a more abstract way, right? You can look at those things and be like, ah, this matches. This is poetic. This is symbolic. But this happened at the time that this was written, and this description matches what I'm seeing. You can do that, right?
That's fine, but that's going away from what we're talking about as materially real or real in the lives of physical beings. So I understand. So this conversation is skewed away from, can we find out whether morality exists, not just feelings of morality or actions that we take to be morality, but or attribute with moral value, but can actual moral culpability and accountability exist for species that are not human? And that when we talk about literary stuff, we're talking about human convention. And I agree that we can use poems and we can do all these kinds of things. That's fine. But I'm talking about the moral argument as a whole of the differentiation between humans and animals. And just because we have human conventions and art, I agree that that's there, but I don't see how that addresses the point of the necessity of tying.
Springer says, do those other numbers exist, or are those numbers like God possibly existent but unknowable? I reject the assertion that God is unknowable. He is knowable finitely. We will never know God fully. And I think that as far as numbers, I would assume that the numbers, as far, insofar as humans can conceive, would go on perceivably infinitely.
Seeing in the equivalent of
but I don't know enough about numbers or mathematics to say.
Nursery rhyme. Did you know that?
I don't doubt that at all.
Maybe they like stories too, and we just don't know because we don't know their language.
Yeah, also, I think you made an equivocation on the word no earlier, re-examination.
Oh, help me out.
Well, I think you were using your definition, not Pixie's. She had already said she believes in some kind of fallibility.
But in order to say you believe in some kind of fallibility, then it wouldn't be fully fallible, right? You'd have to have some kind of knowledge claim in order to know what fallibility is, and
Correct,
you have to have a fixed point in order to say that fallibility exists.
That's why these experiments are objective, and they're done repeatedly to different groups of animals, different members of particular groups.
Okay. How do I even start? There has to be, in order to even think you can do experiments, you have to have fixed points by which you can know that you know things in the first place, including the problem of abduction, as Shapingro would correct me in saying, even though it's colloquially called the problem of induction, where you don't know if the sun's going to come out tomorrow. You don't know if the nature of the future is going to be the same natural reality that we know as the past. We don't know if the universe is going to interact differently with itself tomorrow than it did. Just because it happened that way in the past doesn't mean it's going to happen that way in the future. We know all these things, but aside from that argument against the scientific method being a bastion for atheists to haven themselves in, There's also the fact that you have to have a fixed point. But to say, yes, I agree with the fixed point, which is why we keep doing experiments, is to still hiddenly concede that there is a fixed point by which experiments, being testable and repeatable, have anything to do with. I mean, it's so confusing because it seems like they were arguing for fallibility. You can't even know. Ultimately, we're all agnostic at some point, about everything. And then and that's why we do experiments. Well, can somebody help me out? Which one is it? ED says, if I have 25 corns, that's a whole 25 corns. The size and content of kernels within each one may differ, but that's a whole number that is existent. When you put some thought into it, it all boils down to corn. Peter says, they still have computers calculating the largest prime and perfect numbers. Remarkable. Is a Mandelbrot curve within natural predication of a plant precisely conformed to? No, but the pattern is there. Man, you guys are all brainiacs out there.
Of animals, etc. As I say, there's a hypothesis and a prediction which is made, and if you then go and do the experiment and your prediction is correct, then that should increase the likelihood of the probability that your original hypothesis is correct. And that's how science works in general. And that's why we think that when we witness the behavior of empathy in the higher apes, that they are in fact, using some moral standards to regulate themselves.
Well, let me ask you this. Let's say I own an orchard, and every tree that only gives like 5 apples, we'll say, I'll call that the immoral tree. And every tree that gives 7 apples, I'll call that the moral tree. And I just say that. Is that justified in my form of reasoning to attribute those two?
Well, it depends. It depends whether you can observe some kind of reciprocity between the trees. I don't think you can. But if
okay, so instead of apples, it's reciprocity.
But
perhaps the tree thinks feeding you is immoral.
You're now just giving an unrealistic example. I'm giving you an actual experiments that have been done. Okay,
right? Because
the problem is you're mapping reciprocity as a moral good, but why is that not arbitrary? Why should I believe that that is an actual objective moral truth or law?
You and I recognize objective morality.
So plants recognize people. Maybe it thinks it's immoral to feed you.
My point of using an extreme example is to say we are attributing a quality to phenomenon that we ourselves have not experimented on the quality of. Just because we have testable and repeatable actions that we attribute these qualities to, it does not therefore confirm the qualities we've attributed to it.
Yeah, well, like I've just been trying to explain, it's about making an observation, then making a hypothesis.
It just seems to circle back to the scientific method exists, therefore everything we say about morals is true, which does not follow. Just because you have assigned reciprocity with moral value does not mean that you have proved it within the scientific method by which you have said a thing happens. Which is why I said, if this tree gives me, this number of apples, and this tree gives me another number of apples, and I give one number moral positive significance, and I give another number moral negative significance, I've done that arbitrarily. I argue that the atheist has done the exact same thing with reciprocity, and they have not admitted it. Is murder arbitrary, EOD? It is when I do it. Rev, good to see you, brother. God bless. Rev, by the way, I know we don't have Rex and Rev just yet. We're looking at doing that at about 8:30 my time, 9:30 Eastern. But if you want to hop on the panel, let's have some fun. I do have the link for you in the description, and I do know that you don't need to download, or at least I think you don't need to download anything new for your browser.
And then once you've done that, you can perform an experiment. And if that hypothesis if the chance of the hypothesis being true is raised, right, and it's raised by the prediction coming true, right? If you do that enough times, right, then you can raise the.
I know all of this, but this is about physical phenomena that is bound by scientific law. That has nothing to do with what I've been talking about this entire time.
Probability that the hypothesis is true to such an extent that it becomes knowledge on a fallible basis.
I agree with everything you just said, but I don't agree with the attribution.
That's exactly what's happened.
Hold on, Chapingro, when you say I gotta go play Yanni, do you mean that you play keyboard like Yanni, or do you mean that you're going to put Yanni on records and just chillax tonight?
with morality and animals?
That's where we part.
Okay, that's fine. I can give you experiments which show that chimps.
Hold up a sec. EOD says, the same way mathematical equations reveal themselves in nature, moral is a bit variable. What constitutes murder greatly depends on the circumstances of the time. So the simplest way to put this is murder is unjustified killing, and there is such a thing as justified killing, whether it is capital punishment for those who deserve it or self-defense.
In this particular case, and Pixie gave you an example earlier.
Reverend from the top rope. Ready. Fight.
Where chimps behave in the way of, if they offend one another, then they will apologize. They will bring
Kokoshuko Pakashango, how's it going? Yo yo ma.
gifts, etc. They will try to make that up. That's one type of experiment that's been done. In another experiment.
Great question, EOD. Define unjustified or justified. So unjustified would be a killing that does not meet the moral standards of God. Number one, you would have to go to Romans 13 to find out that the state has the power of the sword to deal out the death penalty for injustices done within a nation. You can see that in Genesis 9:6, where it says, if any man sheds another man's blood, by man shall his blood be shed. So those are a couple instances of justified killing. Also in self-defense, that can be done. So those are a couple examples of justified. Unjustified would be if you're not a soldier in war, if you're not an officer on duty, trying to, with a legitimate reason, like a life-threatening reason why you ought to pull out your firearm and, put the man down, as they say. So those would be a few examples. So to define justified would be on God's terms of what morality is. Obviously, there's a lot of ways to end people's lives that are not justified. Re-X, bro. And there's the Re-X Rex. Indeed, indeed.
Experiment that was done, as the one Pixie said, the one monkey was I think it was a chimp. One chimp was given a particular treat, like a grape, and the other was given a cucumber. And as soon as the one being given a grape realized that the other one was getting a cucumber, he started putting the grape through his grape through the thing so they could equal the grapes out.
And you have these studies of capuchin monkeys and chimps that show that individuals that affiliate with one another, like such as in grooming their partners, they're more likely to share food over time. So there's a emotional connection there.
All of these are just assuming value to all these things. There's not proven. None of it is proven. None of it's based on anything. And I don't think they have a grounding for the value claims they're making for all these behaviors. They're just making descriptions.
Rather than just a short-term transaction.
Yeah, and then crows also, if you feed crows, and their crows are highly intelligent, and they use tools, and they have societies and all that kind of stuff.
You'd want to look at but you'd want to look at species that are closely related to humans, right?
Yeah, we're not trying to prove that dinosaurs or the descendants of dinosaurs are particularly close to us. We're trying.
Okay. EOD says that's perfect. So you describe the context around which a killing can and cannot be justified, so that murder in and of itself is a contextual killing, which is in fact unjustified. So if you're using context as a way of saying justified and unjustified, I agree.
Trying to prove that we are animals, right? And if we look at the animal kingdom, those closest to us, the closer you get to
say, so it's variable. Yeah, it's variable if that's what you mean. That's fair. But it's not fluid, as in like, sometimes when you're angry and you want vengeance as a private citizen, then, maybe you can do it. It's not, I just want to make sure as Andrew likes to say, semantics are important.
Humans in the animal kingdom, the more they act like us.
Right.
Preacher, I'm trying to make friends with the local crows, want them to hang around the house and follow me around when I go for walks. Yeah. Honestly, there's a part of me that's like weird that wants to start doing that too, because maybe I could form a crow army and I'd be like Willard with crows instead of rats, because crows are cooler than rats. Rats can't fly.
Right. And right down to this point about reciprocity.
Yeah, but again, none of this proves the actual value claim. I think here's the difference we're talking about each other.
Again, you're saying prove, right? What do you mean by prove? I've given you a whole list of experiments, right? Which
all of them irrelevant to the idea at hand.
have predictions which have come true.
Can I explain?
That,
can I explain?
No,
though?
let me finish. Let me finish the sentence. Let me finish the sentence. And that it makes the proposition that the original hypothesis is correct much higher, and it's got to such a point that it's become knowledge, scientifically speaking. That's all we're saying, right? So prove. What do you mean by prove? What, mathematically prove?
The major assumption here is the value attributed to the testable repeatable results that I don't even disagree that happened. I don't disagree with any of these experiments that you got these results from all of these behaviors by these bonobos or whatever, right?
Mm-hmm.
I don't disagree with that. I'm saying what makes that moral in any sense of what humans are talking about at all. Because we're talking about moral agency and moral culpability.
But even setting right, but even setting that aside.
Pixie, hang on, Pixie.
The man is talking. No, I'm kidding.
The reason is because that was the hypothesis that was put forward. If chimps have morals,
it's circular then.
It's totally circular.
It's not circular. It's induction. It can't be circular.
Somebody tell me. Okay. There is not a single step of that experiment that proves the moral significance of any of those actions. All it does is show the repetitiveness of the actions, the testability, the conditions by which those actions can be implemented and begin a cycle that continues. That has, look, if people like continuously burn like iron or things into the air, you will have clouds in the air. Does that mean that because we have scientifically found that you could do that and get repeated results, that therefore they are morally good or morally bad clouds? Unbelievable.
Circular because it's assuming the moral prescription and then doing the experiment based on the moral prescription, keeping the attribution of morality to the actions from beginning to end.
No, that's not circular. That's not circular. That's not circular because it's induction, number one. And number two, that's what you're thinking. If you think it's circular, that's because you're trying to apply the deductive rules onto induction. They just don't work that way.
No, it's because we're mapping moral significance on things that don't necessarily have it.
Circularity is assuming what you have yet to prove within your conditions. That's the circular part. The assumption is these acts are moral, but the experiment itself is just a set of descriptors. It is not a set of proving moral significance. My point is you can't even use science to prove moral significance of actions or prove guilt or innocence. You know what? Let's do a skip, because I want to skip to a dialogue with Kieran Markin, because on his show I hopped on there because there was an atheist giving a hard time to some of these people, so I felt like jumping on. So let's skip.
Science just says this is the best model. This is the best understanding we have at the moment.
Yeah, it's pretty good.
The germ theory, germ theory of disease is the best model we have at the moment. So,
okay, hold up. Here's EOD with would you condemn a man who unalived his child's assaulter? It depends on what context he did it. Or worse, raped them. It depends on what context he's accused. Go, Kashuko. So let's put it this way. If the guy caught the guy in the act and the guy fought back so as to acquire force that would end the assaulter's life, in that case, there would be a justification, not because of what he was doing, but because of the circumstances surrounding what he was doing. But you cannot be a vigilante. You don't have the authority to do that. Otherwise, that would be murder. The state should be the one to end the life of the offender.
Germ spread. Yeah. It's not saying it's
Okay, I didn't misunderstand you there, EOD. I know what you meant. Okay.
Just gonna say, you can't. Speaking about germs, it's making my OCD go fucking off the charts. Like,
by the way, language warning for all the children watching the re-examination show today.
I think there's germs in my. Oh my god, there's germs on my mouse. There's germs.
What are germs made of?
I don't know. There's germs in my fucking cigarettes. It's fucking germs. It's fucking. Oh my god, you're killing. Like, I blame you. I blame you for my OCD.
But if I can pin you down, does that attach to a god? What is the connection to a god from that? So you're
God
saying
gave me that gift.
Well, that's an assertion. Can you back that up?
Sir, real quick. So if somebody makes an assertion, they ought to back that up, right? Is that a more okay? So there's a moral law that when somebody makes a claim, they must fulfill that claim, right?
No, I don't know about that. No, sorry, Ray. No, sorry, Ray.
Okay, this really frustrated me because I was making a point, and then Kieran was like trying to put out. He was like friendly fire. It total Benedict Arnold.
Good evening, good morning, Reexamine.
If somebody makes a claim of faith, you don't have to back it up.
Kieran, you're not. Kieran, are you an atheist now?
No.
Okay. So, sir, if somebody makes a claim, do you believe that they have to back it up?
No.
Not you. Not you.
Right. No,
Kieran.
I claim that I have a fire-breathing dragon in my garage at the moment. So do you believe me?
Car hold.
Yeah, car hold. Yeah.
No need to make it fancy in French.
Do you believe me now? Because you can just believe it on faith.
No, what I'm saying is, if you make a claim, you ought to evaluate that claim based on a criteria, right? It would not be big. So that means that if something is real, you ought to then accept it, and if something is proven false, then you ought to reject it, right?
Yeah, but
it's a sad life we live. Unapologetic preacher. It's a sad life, trying to do, no good deed goes unpunished.
Also, Ray, there is
Kieran, can I know what I'm doing. You might not know what I'm doing. How many beers are you in, Kieran? And this
not
one kicked me
enough.
off.
Drink another.
And he kicked me off.
Any cunt who calls me out on how many beers I drunk gets kicked the fuck off. Okay, here we go.
It's White Claws. You got to get it right.
Okay.
Get the fuck out of here.
Okay. I am not talking to you, Kieran. I'm talking to your lovely friend in the white shirt. This is and then we go on about what color the shirt is.
White.
Okay,
I
maybe
know, right? I know. It's fucking blue.
Okay, it's on my bad monitor.
It might be
all right?
gray. I'm not sure. My eyes have been not.
Okay, well, it does look more blue on my better monitor. Got to admit, white, gray, blue.
I'm sorry,
whatever.
I digress. My bad. Please continue.
Everybody knows who I'm talking about, regardless somehow. So, anyway,
I will call it silver.
And thus begins the debate.
Yeah.
Here's where
Your
it goes.
shirt is silver.
I think so. Yeah.
It's metallic and reflecting light and conductive and antibacterial in nature.
Thank goodness.
No, it's silver color. Not actual silver. I'm just saying it's
By the way, this is the format for Kieran's interview show he's trying to form.
silver colored. Yeah.
All right. So, sir. Oh, great example, Rev. So we're trying to tell them the difference between moral, civil, and ceremonial, like we're going to do tonight in about 30 minutes. And then, well, what's your interpretation? Okay, dude who can't talk about the Bible per the rules of the church. You want to shoot me down even though I know the answer? Give me a break, I'm not sure I would. To my mind, vengeance is in such cases justified, such innocence lost. It's a worse crime than assaulting an adult. It requires a worse response. Yeah, I disagree with that. I think that the state alone has that. It might feel good to do that, or you might believe the temptation to sin and do vengeance, but God says, vengeance is mine, saith the Lord, I will repay. So we make it clear that it is God's to carry out, and God's ministers to carry out and deal out death is the state, as per Romans 13. Does it feel good to our manliness who wants to cut people down? No, but that it's God's prerogative on how people are put down and not ours. Do you believe that people ought to accept what is true and they ought not propagate and accept what is false?
Yes.
Okay, where does that ought come from? You need to explain to me why just because something is true that I'm obligated to accept it, and why just because something is false that I am morally... I'm not. Okay. So then there's no reason to use reason. There's nothing compelling about reason.
Yeah, no, you're not obligated, but I think it's the best way to go about things.
How did you use reason to find out what the best thing is?
Because I think it's best to know, like, what is true.
Why?
Because your mental, like, your internal thing matches what is actual reality. Like, if you were stepping outside and into the road.
He's kind of making an anti-pot argument, I would say, here too, by the way. EOD says, if the state decides it's just, then it is, according to the scripture you read. No, there is a justice beyond the state, but regardless of whether or not the state can do things wrong is a separate question as to what context God allows the state to do that and be morally wrong. That doesn't change the fact that only the state can do it, just because the state can do things wrong.
And there was a bus coming towards you. Would you want to know that the bus was going to run you over? Or would you?
No. So EOD, I'm not saying that if government does it, it is therefore just. I'm saying that only government has the authority to end somebody's life in espionage, in war, and in the capital punishment situation.
You not want to know?
Yes, and the reason I want to know is because I have value as a human being, and it is right for me to keep my... Exactly, Kokoshuko Papashango. Why seek the truth? Why not seek a comfortable lie, right? Because if I find my comfortable lie is more conducive to my immediate desires, why shouldn't I prize my immediate desires over the good of others and the actual absolute good of myself to discipline myself and do what is objectively true and objectively right? Because why should I use reason at all if I can't make a value claim about anything that's objective? Safe and alive. I am made in the image of God. I have value, and I ought not put somebody else also in that position where on their conscience they would have my death. But that's because there are moral realities, and the moral reality, for example, is you have value. You are made in the image of God. You have moral agency. You have responsibility.
Right.
And so
right.
that's
no. You made a claim there.
I did make a claim.
You said that.
I love when they say I made a claim. See, look, watch this.
I am made in the image of God. Can you demonstrate that?
Yes, the moral argument based on your claim that I need to demonstrate what I believe and that my claims need to be backed up by evidence, which means that, and again, you say that reality ought to match what's in my mind, right? That can only be true.
No, that's a totally different matter. What I'm saying is, you claimed that I am made in the image of God. Can you demonstrate that?
Yeah, I'm demonstrating it with the moral argument. The moral argument that you are supposing is that people ought to back up their claims. They cannot make claims morally. They're able to make claims, but they ought not choose to make claims that they cannot back up. That is a moral argument. And morals can only exist if there is a person. Hold on. Morals can only exist if there is a personal basis, because you cannot be morally accountable to rocks, to space, to physics. You have to be morally accountable to conscious minds, persons. Because there is a law that is moral that we are able to break, but we know is wrong, that is a proof that there is a God that transcends space and time, keeps us accountable, gives us purpose, and that though we have free will and are able to violate that purpose, the fact that the moral laws exist is inescapable, which is why people ought to back up their claims. That is a responsibility for what people say and what people believe. For example, you don't want creationism in schools, do you?
No, what I'm saying is, you're saying that people have got to back up their claims. I agree with that.
I know you do.
Fine. But that has nothing to do with God.
It does.
If you make a claim, then you have to back it up.
That's a moral claim you just made.
It's not. It's not really a moral.
Yes, it is, because what you're doing is you're giving a value assessment to what truth and reality is, and you're saying I ought to live in accordance with it. That is a moral claim.
Well, fuck off. I mean, just saying. Look, I'm trying to fucking. Oh my god, the background's wrong because it says it says that Wild Heart is Kira Markin and Ree is special
wait,
guest. Okay.
wait. Who's talking right now? I'm talking to Kieran.
No, you were speaking to Wild Heart.
This is clearly Kieran. Wow, how many White Claws have I had? This is clearly Kieran, which should be the name of the show anyway. That's right, Bingo Hicks. It was kind of like talking to all, but here's the problem. Most atheists probably haven't heard this argument before because they don't know that endemic to a debate is moral law. Is this guy really drunk? I don't know how many people were drunk on this panel. But
I'm also.
That's better. That's better. That's
yeah.
Just, can we just
That's not Kieran. It's Bricky. It's not Bricky either, but that's funny. I think Bricky would be very offended to be. What's all this then?
Can we bask in the joy of? That's a better background. Okay, here we go.
I should like this stream. That is a moral claim. Indeed, that is a moral claim. We are all bound. Even though we have free wills, we are all bound to like tonight's stream before 20 minutes, and we'll be at the next Rex and Rev episode. Rev, are you still there with us?
Okay. So, so Waldhart, tell Re-Experience why,
Re-Experience. Sounds like a nostalgia show.
I like it. I like it. Well, hang on. We have Abe saying, "What's the ought?" Okay, boys. Here's the question.
Yeah.
Here's the question. What's the ought?
Yeah. So the ought is people ought to live in accordance with what is true, and they ought to reject what is false. Therefore, there's an intrinsic prescriptive quality to what is real that we ought to live in accordance, and people ought to abandon things that are false. Therefore, we also ought to persuade other people to reject ideas because there's a criteria by which we ought to think.
I completely agree with that. Yeah.
He completely agrees with that. None of that, I contend, is possible without God. So that's the argument there. If morals exist, it means we have purpose. That purpose requires an intent. That intent requires a mind. That mind is God. We are directly accountable to God. We are answerable to God. There are rules. And if we break those rules, then that means that there is a way that we ought to have lived in the first place, right? Because you can't break rules that don't exist. And so if you're going to have me accountable to, you made a claim, back up that claim. Why should I back up any claim? Why should I justify any thoughts I have in my head? What gives you the right to deputize yourself and say, I'm going to play idea police with you. I'm going to play claim police with you. Somebody tell me that.
Yeah.
That's the moral argument for God.
Yeah. But you have to demonstrate that God exists.
It is a necessary. Okay, maybe he's drunk. Maybe I shouldn't be laughing, but that's the necessary entailment. Necessary entailment of morality.
Why? How? Right. Explain that.
Yeah. So because there are transcendent laws for how we ought to behave, and transcendent laws for how we ought to behave must come from a personal source because it can't come from rocks or open space or physics, and they bind us all in our behavior. Therefore, that comes from God because it's universal, timeless, and binding.
Timeless.
That's correct. Okay, then we start talking about time because he says that if God does things before the beginning of the earth, then he requires time to exist. Therefore, God cannot be timeless. Therefore, God doesn't exist. And I'm saying that, well, no, God is the governor of reality. I think time is only interactive with matter. That's why you have the theory of relativity when it comes to gravity and how gravity affects time and how time works, because if you put an atomic clock on the moon versus putting an atomic clock on the earth, there's going to be different time rates, even though we share the same universe.
Right.
No, because I don't go into the experiment.
Because that's the hypothesis. It can't be circular.
You don't go into the experiment expecting they have moral behavior or they don't have moral behavior and then observe behavior to make it that way. You say.
They don't even have the criteria in science to tell you that humans have moral behavior. They don't even have that. And yet they're supposed to do that with animals. Even though we're all humans, recognizing we have a conscience, we have moral guilt or innocence, we have moral culpability, and we have more responsibility to each other. Seahawk says, I avoid debating drunks. You're debating what they drank, not them. Very true. Very true. And I wasn't sure because sometimes I can't tell the difference between a cockney and a drunk. Bingo says the impossibility of the contrary vis-a-vis these transcendental categories proves God's existence. Yes, that's true. The only difference, Bingo, is I'm trying a new argument, which I'm trying to hit on the conscience of people, which has to do with absolute morality. And within the confines of the debate is the necessary assumption of morality to say, you made a claim, you need to back up that claim. So even if he was drunk, he was sober enough to do the classic atheist line, you made a claim, everything you have to say, you have to back up, you have to do it because otherwise, if you don't do that, then I don't have to believe what you say. But if you do back up your claim, then I have to believe what you say. But if it's possible for somebody to back up their claim and you can choose not to believe it, then what gives that choice moral value, more or less? Let's see. Bond says, I would love a conversation with 3X. It would be fun, LOL. Well, that was flattering.
They may have moral behavior. If they have some moral considerations, these are some things I might expect.
Thank you, sir.
And then you wait to see if they display those things.
Okay,
right?
let's separate the behavior from, I'm talking about the accountability.
And wait, hold on.
And
On top of that, going back to the very beginning of this argument, setting morality aside, never mind, I forgot where I was going to go with that. I'll bring it back up in a minute. Go ahead.
Well, the point again is, right, that we did go looking for it. That's fair enough. But the point is, predictions were made on what we expect animals to do if they do have this behavior, right? And they had that behavior. That increases the probability that the expectation of them having moral systems is correct, right? No one's saying it's absolute proof.
So
that's
circular.
not how this works. No, it certainly isn't circular. We're not saying that we assume they have it, therefore they have it. What we're saying is
no, you are saying I assume certain actions are moral. So when I see actions that I interpret to be moral, therefore that is the proof of the morality of the species. That's the circularity.
We assume they have it. If they do have it, we would expect X result, right? We go and make a test for that, a blind test, and if they have it, that it makes the initial hypothesis much more likely.
Okay,
right? Especially when it's demonstrated. Especially when it's demonstrated. This is just how induction works. So when you say
think I'm talking about the experiment, I'm not complaining about the experiment.
Prove, no one's talking about ontology here.
I am.
Right, and that's wrong because we are giving.
That's wrong. You heard that? He's made a value claim.
Giving you an inductive argument,
which is nothing I never disagreed with.
To say it's ground. To say what is the grounding? Do they know their own grounding? They don't have to know their own grounding. That's not important.
I'm not even talking. Oh, gosh.
All right, I remembered where I was going with it. Here's my problem with treating this as a deductive argument. Here's my problem with it. You are starting with presuppositions I don't share, and that's fine. That's not a problem for you. That's a problem for me to overcome. But here's where we're going with it, right? I am looking at what is around me and how things operate around me, and I am building off of that, right? And you are pulling in some unobservable forces and saying that that puts the burden on me to prove it.
Okay, is a burden of proof an observable force, or is it a moral claim?
Second, we are dealing with man-made and man-defined classifications. Mammals, animals, primates, apes. Nobody is saying that Yahweh said this is what an animal is, therefore we're an animal. Nobody's saying Yahweh divided reptilians from mammals and this is how we're classifying them. So what? I don't even understand what the fight is about on some levels.
Is that a question?
Yeah. Like what? Why do you care how man classified different beings in a man-made system? And why does that in any way involve your deity to negate if you want us to prove that we're animals?
Yeah, Peter, that's a great point. He says, I also want to ask someone their standard for truth is before I debate them on anything. Yeah, and usually I ask that in terms of like criteria. So when somebody says, prove to me that God exists, I will ask them by what criteria? Because if they're going to ask for proof, that means they are proposing some method. And then I want to know the method that they will accept. Otherwise, they're just going to hide the ball for the rest of the discussion.
So bad, how come you can't prove we're not without your deity that's unfalsifiable and untestable?
The problem with if you want to say that that what I was trying to bring to bear at the beginning of this with the morality conversation is to even have a debate is to hold somebody's feet to the fire that they ought to believe, which they know to be true, and they ought to justify that and back that up. Even the burden of proof is a moral claim, because if somebody makes a claim, they ought to back that up or back off of it. That is something that everyone on this panel shares, whether they want to admit that or not. That's what I was pointing to when it came to debate itself, or discussion or discourse.
We share what again? Wait, we share what?
We share the belief that people ought to accept what they know to be true.
Accept?
Yes. So, for example, let's say there is a mother and she loves her.
Yeah, she was trying to say Yahweh, I think. I mean, she also calls Christian nationalists Al-Qaeda. Yeah, that's how it sounded to me. I could be wrong, but it came across that way to me.
Son a little too much, and we say this is proof on the footage that your son punched somebody else's son in the face, right? And then she just won't accept it. She won't believe it. She won't take responsibility. She'll say, that's not my son, that's not my sweetie poo. She is accountable objectively to accept what she knows to be true and not fight it and not delay in dealing what she's responsible for.
So you mean
and people do that too when they have done horrible things. They will take all sorts of drugs to burn their conscience alive and just like bog it down and bury it deep inside themselves. They'll turn to drink, they'll turn to booze, they'll turn to thrills to forget the wrong that they've done, and it just dogs them the rest of their lives until they die.
Should we believe and act in light of? Yes. Accept is a different word, and I don't think that we always should.
Yeah, she should only accept it if there's evidence for it.
So
should. That was a should. That was an ought.
How do you act in light of it without accepting it?
No, accept is a different word. I can know something and find it unacceptable. I can know that this thing is happening and be like, nope, don't accept that. Moving along. Right?
Okay.
Accept is a different thing. Should I believe?
I'm not saying that you should fall in line with it. Like if somebody is an evil dictator, that you should fall in line.
That's why I said, should I believe in or act in accordance to? Sure.
Okay, that's fair. Then you should. It just sounds almost repetitive to say believe what you know to be true. So when I say accept, that's what I meant. That you shouldn't fight it. You should just take it into account that if you are proven wrong on something, you ought to accept the truth. That reality itself is prescriptive to the.
Well, Peter, I think they just haven't had this line of argumentation before, where debate itself became the platform by which moral realities are demonstrably true, because you just cannot live without them. It is impossible to live without moral realities. And they can posit this world where moral realities don't exist because they can see and observe matter and they can hide behind that. But it is highly imaginable to think of a universe where there are people, there are things and birds and trees and rocks and space and physics and all that kind of stuff. And imagine that world having actually no assigned significance to anything whatsoever, including that which is real. No prescriptive qualities to what is real at all. You could assume that, right? And it could be imaginable. Tell me why that is not true in this universe. Tell me why in this universe people have to back up what they have to say. Tell me why in this universe people are accountable for what they do. Tell me why in this universe I ought to reconsider better ideas. Or I'm ought to think that some ideas are better. Or if there are like 3 ideas that are of equal value, but they all compete, that I ought to not arbitrarily dismiss 2 and keep 1 if there's not any sufficient evidence to dismiss 2 of them and keep 1 of them. Finger says, I honestly think that deep down, people have trouble accepting the incontrovertible proof of God for personal reasons of justifying their sins and avoiding accountability. That is 100% true. Your own personal reasons. Oh gosh, I'm gonna
human mind. That's what I'm getting at.
Yeah, sure, but
that's the morality.
How to determine
that's it.
truth?
That's it.
Though,
That's it.
particular...
That's it. All right, back that up. Back that up. Back that up.
You shouldn't fight it. You should just take it into account that if you are proven wrong on something, you ought to accept the truth. That reality itself is prescriptive to the human mind. That's what I'm getting at.
Yeah, sure, but
that's the morality.
That's it. That's it right there. That strain was the cognitive dissonance between what she has to believe in order to challenge Christianity, but what she can't believe in order to not accept it. I think I said that right. She has to believe that reality is prescriptive to our human thoughts and that we have a responsibility to align ourselves with that, and we should strive to know more about that, to be better, to recognize the value that pre-exists our estimation of valuable things. But as soon as she admits that, she admits moral realities, which point to purpose, which point to intent, which point to design, which point to a mind, which point to God. I'm going to hear that again.
The itself is prescriptive to the human mind. That's what I'm getting at.
You know what, Peter? I'm going to repeat it again. I'm going to back that up one more time. Do I have clips enabled? I hope I have clips enabled.
Act in accordance to, sure.
Okay, that's fair. Then you should. It just sounds almost repetitive to say believe what you know to be true. So when I say accept, that's what I meant. That you shouldn't fight it. You should just take it into account that if you are proven wrong on something, you ought to accept the truth. That reality itself is prescriptive to the human mind. That's what I'm getting at.
Yeah, sure, but
that's the morality.
How to determine truth, though, particularly when you're not talking about something objective, and therein lies.
Oh my gosh. How to okay.
Truth, so yeah, sure, but
that's the morality.
How to determine truth, though, particularly when you're not talking about something objective, and therein lies the problem, right? Because I can talk about a subjective. I can talk about a subjective. Hold on. I can talk about a subjective incident that affects two different cultures, and one culture can be feel incredibly, like, let's say, incredibly. I don't even want to say disrespected. Let's say purposefully offended. And the other side can feel the same way at the same time because of their own cultural reasons. And if I look at it from their point of view, then they're right. And if I look at it from the other point of view, then they're right. Who's really right?
Well, when that becomes a lot clearer when you get specific. If you're talking about if somebody bombed somebody, if somebody stole something from somebody, but if we're talking in vagaries like somebody walked in without their shoes, and that people should know that, that's different, because that in of itself, I don't think there's a grounds to say that that is moral. Whereas if you're talking about the unjustified killing of somebody's life or theft or things like that, then that's completely different. So if we're going to say they're offended, because I know you want to do offend that. I know you want to do. Sorry. I know you wanted to backtrack from offended. You want something clearer than offending. That you want to talk about if somebody was victimized in that case, and that would fall into a kind of a gray area bucket of like basic respect based on cultural customs that maybe they should have brushed up on before, and that would go back to their responsibility to find out what those are before engaging in that step. So
if I wasn't clear enough, if you're going to a culture that's foreign to you, you should probably brush up on your etiquette before going in. So fair enough, but gray areas do not erase bright lines. Some deal with they witness miracles and still deny Christ's divinity. It's a pride thing, indeed. Now, Rev, if you're still out there, I gave you a link, and before we start Reaction Rev, I want to at least know that you are ready to go, ready to rip rock. Otherwise, I'm going to keep going with this because I think this is very interesting. Now, I agree. Oh, what do we got? I also agree that, oh, yeah. Anyway, looking at Discord, Teriak's going crazy right now.
It's kind of vague until you get specific. It's kind of like people say, well, how do you know your interpretation of the Bible is right? And then okay, what were we talking about? And then if we get into like polygamy or slavery or eating shrimp, then I can actually.
Yeah, Peter. Part of the patience is the fact that I definitely hate crash outs. I hope to never crash out. Nobody is infallible. Nobody is perfect when it comes to that kind of stuff. But I also wanted to actually hear what they're saying, because if nobody's going to be won to Christ by arguments. Only people will be won to Christ by the gospel. And I don't know how much gospel knowledge these people have. I'm guessing they have some because they frequent atheistic chats and things like that. But part of it is wanting to have a good faith discussion and know what they're actually saying. The problem is that I don't think they're extending the exact same charity I am when they're not listening to me when I say you are mapping morality on top of actions and not justifying it and saying that it proves morals. That is the circular part.
To give verses, but if they just say, well, if people got different interpretations, that's too broad and vague.
No, it's not. I mean, like, okay, here's an example from Legends. All right. And we'll not name the people, okay, so that it doesn't get too fantastical here. But let's go from some Legends. Group A does a lot during the day, and they go to sleep at night, just like normal humans, right? And this group is known for like trading and for being diplomats and for trying to be really friendly. They'll even go out of their way to broker peace between other tribes that have nothing to do with them, right? On the other side of that is this community B. Community B is very, very reclusive. They do not talk to anybody. They want to be left the fuck alone so bad that they hole up in stone dwellings and caves during the day, and they only come out at night. Now, because people are expanding, Group A and Group B are getting closer and closer to each other. Group B just wants to be left the fuck alone, but because they're always out at night in the suspicious hour where Group A feels vulnerable.
Okay, Rev, we'll do it this way. I gave you the link to this particular stream. You can jump on this stream when you're ready. Then I will exit out of this stream when we're done, and then we can send everybody to the Rex and Rev review of moral law, civil law debate that we're finishing up tonight. Peter says, without standing the ultimate presuppositions, you end up essentially gaslighting each other. You are arguing from two different worlds. Yeah, it is a whole lot of talking past each other. I don't know what she's talking about right now because this was very context dependent. Also, I will say it is easier to find patience when it's a 3-on-1 debate, and you're kind of encircled. In the original video, we were reviewing my debate with Andrew. Two of my debates with Andrew.
Group A is starting to really freak out and be paranoid about Group B. There's more and more sightings. It's always at night when they're vulnerable. What the hell are these things doing? And suddenly, both sides start getting very paranoid about the other, right? Who is wrong for feeling threatened?
Yeah, gray areas don't negate moral absolutes. You can have muddled or complicated situations, but that doesn't make it that moral absolutes don't exist. There are ambiguities in like where does red begin, but that doesn't mean red doesn't. For example,
my problem with people's moral prescriptions is the subject of the moral prescription oftentimes fails to be the actual thing being measured.
Okay.
Lying is a good example. You shouldn't lie unless it protects somebody, unless it this, unless it that. Well, then if we have all this unless, then we're not actually measuring the act of lying. We're measuring the intent, the motives, and the effects behind and of the lie.
Or we could just be sorting our priorities.
Then lying would be amoral, right?
No, not necessarily. So for example, again, when you talk about espionage, like if you're in the government, that's unfortunately how the game is played for survival. You have to lie in the case of the government, but the government has a unique space in society to do that. We as citizens don't have a unique space in society to lie. And if you ask me the question about like under the floorboards and the SS shows up. I don't know what I would do personally in that situation. I might lie, but my conviction is not to lie under any circumstances. I don't think there is that given space. Some argue that there is. I don't. That's my position.
See, then you and I will always disagree. I don't believe in an objective set of morals.
Okay. Well, I think that
I don't even think the acts we list in morals are the thing being measured. I don't think killing is being.
Then why do I have to justify any thoughts or any arguments whatsoever? Why can't I just lie in all of my debates? Why can't I just lie in all my arguments and it'd be just as valuable as if somebody told the truth? Why is that would be just as valuable? Being irrational would be just as valuable as being rational. If every estimation of every value is made up, I mean, does that apply to the value of human life as well? I mean, my gosh. And of course, I'm talking about human life. I'm talking about innocent human life.
Measured. That's why we separate killing from murder. I don't think lying is being measured because that's why
we separate killing from murder because of moral laws. Moral law is the only delineation because murder is unjustified killing. It's all there. The components are right there in the idea themselves, and they're just glossed over because they're assumed and they're never really thought through and never really addressed.
We have these exceptions. I don't think the thing we talk about is actually the thing we're measuring.
So what are we?
And I think it makes it really hard to talk about the idea of objective moral.
I think that was a good question too. What are we criticizing Andrew for? Because if I say Andrew lies, and then I go to, well, Andrew's wrong for lying, except for all the times that it's right to lie. So I guess Andrew isn't wrong for lying. How can you analyze anything at that point anymore?
Morals when we can't even address the actual moral in the thing that we're trying to convey.
So what are we criticizing Andrew over? If not, I mean, let's put it this way. If we could tell Andrew, you shouldn't believe A, you should believe B, would you do it?
I don't know what the hell he should believe.
Can somebody in the chat tell me, why are we having a debate if you have no idea what anybody ought to believe, including, and that would assuming include yourself? If you don't know what anybody should believe, how do you know what you believe is true? And how do you know that your pushback is legitimate when you're disagreeing with me or anybody for that matter?
I know I don't believe his shit, and he'd have a hell of a hard time convincing me of a lot of what he says. Not everything. I'm sure I'm inclined to agree from time to time, but he like, no, I can't convince him, and he can't convince me. I don't know what he should do. It's none of my business.
Well, then I would, but without even going over the fact that saying something is none of another person's business is also a moral claim. What have we spent all this episode doing then in this 3-on-1 debate, discussing the conclusions I have to come to about evolution, the conclusions I have to come to about humanity, the conclusions I have to come to about science, proving morality, when all you've done is like, oh my gosh. It's like if you put a wizard hat on your dog and you're like, let's do an experiment to see if your dog is a wizard. And the wizard hat represents the assignment of wizard you put on top of him. And then let's just say the hat stays on the dog's head all day. The dog never takes the hat off. And it's like you use the fact that the dog is on the hat's head all day. Well, the beginning of the experiment was 8 a.m. The end of the experiment was, 7 p.m. And the hat stayed on the dog's head all day. Therefore, we witnessed that he is a wizard. No. The same thing you do with morality. You put the morality hat on top of your particular object that you already think is moral. You call it an experiment because there is something you're observing in general. But the entire time, nothing has changed in the dynamic of what you experience as a moral thing and what you have proven to be a moral thing. Reminds me of Terry Pratchett. You'll have to remind me of Terry Pratchett because I know the name, but I don't know who that is. This is your brain on atheism, says Peter.
Just don't do that shit around me and we're good.
Moral claim.
Cool.
Well, you guys, it's been a long one. Almost 4 hours.
I think we worked it all out.
I doubt it, but
now let's have a picnic.
Right. That was actually really fun. Thank you guys for coming on.
She spends tons of time on YouTube judging many things, including Christianity bad, and then closes with that and has no shame. The lack of shame is the thing. Look, I get along with Pixie. I get along with a lot of these guys. We have different points of agreement, but I had to cover this because number one, I am developing this moral argument from in light of what debate is. Because again, if you're saying that I ought to use reason in order to evaluate things, and we use reason as a tool to abandon false ideas and take on true ideas, you're making a value claim about what is true and what is false and what I ought and ought not do. Welcome to the show, Marilyn. You missed everything. Oh boy, Discworld. That's like 30 books or something. What the heck is Discworld? There was a wizard who was failing at being a wizard. It was a great made-for-TV movie based on a long series of books. All right. You know what? I'm putting the link in the chat. And once Rev shows up, we can start Rex and Rev at some point. But up until the point Rev stops eating, and I'm guessing his method of eating is like a bird. He probably takes a tweezer. He's got this big bowl of rice. And he takes a little tweezers, and then he dips the tweezers into the bowl of rice and then lays it on his tongue. And that is his ingestion process. Yeah. Wait, so it's a book series, huh? And then while we're waiting on that, we can also go back to the whole time thing. If you want to talk about time and space. Are you actively recruiting the mushroom hoe for your panel? No, not actively recruiting. It's just there. In the meantime, but we could also I could also just start with the Rex and Rev stream. That's another example. That's another option I can take. Well, lady and gentlemen, I think I'm just going to put a little more pressure on Rev to get that hoagie down his throat hole, and then we can start the review of the finishing of the debate on whether or not we are morally obligated to obey the laws of the Old Testament, the civil laws specifically of the Old Testament. The answer to that, of course, is no, but the details is in our series. And tonight is the finale, and I want to go over the debate as well as the Q&A. So I'm going to get you guys the link for that, and copy that over, and then so link is dropped in the chat for that. I love you, bro. I want to know this is a hard milestone to pass. What? Hold up. What's a hard milestone to pass? When I hear about passing stones, it just sounds painful. So. Ooh, it is interesting. It was a good debate. The weird part is it's got this guy in there named JD Hall. And if you've heard of JD Hall lately, it has to do with his interview with Tucker Carlson, where JD Hall is kind of like signaling to the far right. So that's unfortunate. 500 subs. Yeah. I'm just gonna, obviously, please, if you guys would like to subscribe, it's much appreciated. But in the meantime, I'm just going to have fun and be content with what I'm doing, trying to get around and learn and have encounters and just go forward with what I've got and do what I think is right and go forward from there. But anyway, yeah, links in the description. We're going to wrap it up for now. And I will see you guys next time.